It's Super Tuesday, March 5th, right now on CNN This Morning. Donald Trump hoping to clinch the nomination with a Super Tuesday sweep after a Supreme Court ruling keeps him on the ballot in all 50 states. Is Super Tuesday Nikki Haley's last hurrah, or is there a plan B if she drops out of the race? And by the end of the day, that rematch that 7 out of 10 Americans say they don't want could be on the next steps for Joe Biden and Donald Trump. All right, 6 a.m. here in Washington. This is a live look at Raleigh, North Carolina. Polls are opening there in just half an hour. One of the states we're watching most closely today for clues about what we could learn ahead of the general election. Good morning to you. I'm Casey Hunt. It's wonderful to have you with us. Super Tuesday has arrived. Donald Trump, again, hoping to pull off a 15-state sweep over Nikki Haley, with more than a third of all the delegates at stake. If that happens, the former president would have more than 90% of the delegates needed to clinch the Republican nomination. That, of course, sets up the rematch that most Americans say they don't want. Trump versus Biden. On Super Tuesday Eve, the former president was praising the Supreme Court for ruling that he can't be kicked off Colorado's ballot, and he urged the justices to also vote in his favor on absolute presidential immunity.
You don't want to have your opposing party or opponent or even somebody that just thinks you're wrong bring a criminal suit against you or any kind of a suit when you leave office. I have that right now at a level that nobody's ever seen before. I have rogue prosecutors, and I have rogue judges. Historically, a thing like what I've been going through would have hurt a political party or a political candidate terrifically. You wouldn't even run. You wouldn't be able to run. You'd get out. And the polls show that I'm much more popular than I was before.
So there's that. Nikki Haley, meanwhile, is not committing to whether she'll stay in the race beyond Super Tuesday. She did make it clear to Texas voters, where she was campaigning, though, that she's not going down without a fight.
We lost in 2018. We lost in 2020. We lost in 2022. But look, 2 weeks ago, Republicans lost the vote on Mayorkas. They lost the vote on Israel. The RNC chair lost her job, and Donald Trump's fingerprints were on all of it. How much more losing do we have to do before we realize maybe Donald Trump is the problem?
All right, CNN's Elena Treen begins our Super Tuesday coverage. She's live in Richmond, Virginia. Elena, good morning. It's wonderful to see you. What are you hearing from the Trump campaign? Especially, you're in Virginia. There's a lot of interesting dynamics, in particular in that state, where we may learn things about not just the dynamics in the primary, but for the general election. What do you know?
Right. Well, good morning. And yes, we are in Richmond, Virginia. The polls just opened here. It's still pretty sleepy. We just saw one car come in, but not many people here yet. But look, to get into the Trump side of it, they are very confident about how he is going to perform today. But they're also very aware that Nikki Haley has not said what she is going to do beyond Super Tuesday. We know that she had pledged to stay in the race at least through today, but it's unclear what will happen after that. And I know from my conversations with Donald Trump's senior advisors, they're really hoping to see her drop out. They are very eager to have him be the presumptive Republican nominee as early as possible. Of course, as you mentioned, Casey, he's going to be shy of the delegates, regardless of how many states he wins today. That will come in a couple weeks. But they want to have the infrastructure behind him. And they also want to convince a lot of the people who are looking for an alternative to Donald Trump to come out and support him. And it's not just voters, but also donors. They need that money and the finances to boost him to a real general election campaign against Joe Biden. Now, to your second question about Virginia, this is a very important state. Donald Trump had lost it in 2016 and in 2020. But from my conversations with the Trump campaign, they do really see this as a battleground, and they believe they could make a play for it in a potential rematch against Joe Biden. And part of that is really trying to target suburban voters, I'm told. And they think the message that really resonates with them here in this state is talking about the economy. They believe that a lot of people in this state are very concerned about the strain on their wallets, about inflation, even as the economy is getting better. And part of the reason we actually saw Donald Trump here over the weekend is because they believe the state is in play so much. It was one of 2 visits he made over the weekend, the only 2 states he visited really in the lead up to Super Tuesday today. So I think that just gives you a little insight into how they're viewing this.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Elena Treen for us in Richmond. You got a long day ahead of you. Thank you very much for starting us off today. I really appreciate it. All right, our panel joins us now. Republican strategist and pollster Kristen Soltis Anderson, Zolan Kano-Young, he's White House correspondent for the New York Times. Former South Carolina State Representative Bakari Sellers is back with us. Matt Gorman, former Tim Scott presidential campaign senior advisor, also back with us this morning. Thank you guys for starting us off on a really big election day. Kristen, let me start with you in terms of what we heard from Trump there. That, of course, was his speech yesterday after the Supreme Court decided that he was going to stay on the ballots. But he's talking all about how, well, these cases, these legal cases, anyone else wouldn't be able to win. I can win. I've heard you talk about this in the past. Like, sure, it seems to have worked well. I mean, Ron DeSantis would say it worked well for Trump in the primary election. But today is really about the start of the general, and it seems like it would cut very differently. You talk to voters all the time. How do you understand it?
So I think in some ways Donald Trump is right that if anybody else was facing the kind of legal pressure that he was, he would not be consistently running even or slightly ahead of the incumbent president in polls. So there is some element of truth that he is uniquely immune to being punished by voters for things that would drive other candidates completely out of the race. So today, as we are looking at Super Tuesday, he's likely to have a very good night. He's likely to really cement himself as the presumptive Republican nominee with these wins. And in all of this, even as somebody like Nikki Haley has tried to make the case over and over, as you saw in that clip, he's a loser. He's got all this baggage. What are we doing? Republican voters have thus far been pretty immune to hearing that argument.
Yeah, I mean, Bakari, why is that? I mean...
Oh, I don't know.
Matt, why is that? We can ask both of you.
Yeah. No, well, I will say this. In the fall, once you started seeing these head-to-head polls, Trump versus Biden, Trump pulled even or ahead. You saw a tone change among the Republican primary voters. I saw this myself in Iowa and New Hampshire. People would say before that, I like Trump, I just don't think he can win. Now, their head and their heart didn't have to be bifurcated. It gave them license to go with what their heart was saying all the time, and it took away a massive talking point for Nikki, DeSantis, my old boss, Tim Scott, everybody else in the race, where if Trump was consistently down 5-10 points to Biden, it is a different primary. Maybe he still wins, but it's very different.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, what you're seeing from Republican voters is somewhat of an abandoning of truly conservative values. This isn't the party of Reagan. This isn't the party of either Bush. This isn't the party of even Mitt Romney. This is Donald Trump's party.
Definitely. They hate Mitt Romney.
This is Donald Trump's party, right? And so you have voters, and you go out there and you hear voters talk about the fact that Republicans are parties of law and order. Well, here you have somebody who has, 90-some indictments. It's the party of family first values. You have somebody who has 5 kids by 3 baby mamas. You have somebody who it's a party of fiscal responsibility, and you have a candidate who's abandoned those fiscal values and run up the deficit. That's a talking point from Nikki Haley. And so when you have an individual like this who's the antithesis to what we believe to be true conservatism, you have a party that has become a cult of personality. Democrats used to be the same way. Kennedy, Obama, Clinton, cult of personality. Not to this extent, but you're seeing Republicans now, they're voting for personality. They're not voting for values or policy. They're voting for personality.
I'm not saying that this will necessarily change the sentiment among Republican voters, but I do think it's interesting to watch after this Supreme Court decision. It does undermine Trump's argument as well that there's a witch hunt against him, that every single aspect of the judicial system is out to get him. Now you have a Supreme Court that pretty much gave him a win here as well. Also, we've been talking about how immune...
The Supreme Court that he put a bunch of justices on, but it was a unanimous ruling. So
Correct.
yes, I absolutely take your point.
With also some debate as well about some of the details around that decision, particularly around the argument that Congress now is really the only body that would have the ability to actually make a decision on this issue as well. Yes, we've talked about how immune he is thus far. I'm interested to see, as you noted, now that we are entering the heat of the general election, whether that remains to be true.
Also, we keep tossing around this word immune. He has been immune to voters. The question is he going to be immune to jurors? Mm-hmm. I mean, that is a big question.
If we get there.
We'll get there. I mean, we're going to get there somewhere. I mean, there are just too many for us not to get there. And then the question becomes, what impact do those jurors have on the general election? I think it's a different race when you have a convicted felon running for president of the United States.
Delaying these cases is a part of the strategy, though, too. And it has been going back to impeachment proceedings as well, delaying it past the election, which seems likely for many of these cases, too.
Yeah, I mean, Kristen, what do you hear from, we heard it in the exit polls in terms of this distinction between someone who's accused of a crime, innocent before proven guilty, and someone who's convicted of one. Do you think that that's a number that holds? And do you think, I mean, the general election polling for Joe Biden has been really tough over the course of the last couple weeks. There does seem to be this kind of sense that that it might not just be Republican primary voters who don't care about this. If, you know, I mean, Elena, we'll give the Trump campaign, okay, they think Virginia's going to be a battleground. I don't know if like the Northern Virginia suburbs, but if they really think they can get voters there, I mean, that also makes a statement.
Well, there are a lot of voters that they don't like Donald Trump or Joe Biden. They're not part of a cult of personality, but they are telling pollsters like me that they think they have not been better off under Joe Biden's policies, and at least under Trump, they were maybe okay or maybe even better off. I mean, there's a big distinction in polls on that question. And maybe for some of it, it's voters looking through rose-colored glasses. I'm sure the Biden campaign will be very eager to say it was not as good as you think it is. I'm sure we'll see a lot of that on the airwaves. But this isn't just about people liking Donald Trump. And for many of them, let's say it's the New York case, the one about the campaign finance stuff with Michael Cohen.
Which is the one we're going to actually see go to trial.
That may be something where voters go, this feels a little ticky-tack to me. I want my wallet is the thing that matters more. That to me is not a problem.
That's the case that Republicans as a party feel strongest defending on its merits. And I'll also say this to kind of go back to the hypothetical. I mean, I'm not a pollster, but I'll play one on TV. Like, it is extremely hard to poll a hypothetical. For example, if a week before the Access Hollywood tape came out, pretend you are telling a voter what was on that tape and describing it as a hypothetical.
Yeah.
You would see the poll numbers go down. When it actually happened in real life, the poll numbers went down for the weekend, and then by 3-4 days out, they leveled off.
It's the most fascinating thing in American politics. When we are 10 years, 20 years from now, I have to literally sit and look at my friends like Matt and be like, can you believe you voted for somebody who literally on an Access Hollywood tape, I'm not going to repeat it because it's 6:12 in the morning. It's a little early while people are getting their kids out to school. But can you believe you voted for somebody who said that?
He might win the presidency twice. Like right now,
there are a hell of a lot of people who voted for him.
I
know, but
the general election, he's up 2 to 4 points consistently in most polls right now. Just a fact.
I just go back. I mean, honestly, I should have the producers cut the bite of him saying I could shoot people on Fifth Avenue. It would be fine, and we could just be like, play it again, because it happens over and over and over. I mean, Trump, for all of his flaws, I mean, this is a thing that he repeatedly shows is that he has an ability to put kind of a finger on the pulse of where his people are and understand what they'll handle from him. It is remarkable. All right, Kristen Zolan, Bakari, Matt are all going to stay with us because ahead on CNN this morning, is President Biden ready for this possible rematch with Donald Trump? Likely rematch, let's call it. Plus, a deadly crash, a small plane slamming into the shoulder of an interstate in Nashville. Yikes. And Bezos or Musk, the richest person on earth, is...
This is a unifying factor. Everybody now is together, and they can go after me as a politician. They can go after me with votes, but they're not going to go after me with that kind of lawsuit that takes somebody out of a race who's leading in this case.
All right, that was former President Trump speaking from Mar-a-Lago after the Supreme Court ruled that he should remain on the ballot in Colorado, rejecting that state's reading of the 14th Amendment. The panel is back with us, excuse me. Bakari, we showed Trump making this argument like, okay, here I am on the ballot. That's where I should be. The voters should get to decide this. I got to say, like, when I talk to Democrats that I would consider some of the better ones at figuring out how to win elections, like, they say the same thing, actually, that this ruling works for them.
I actually think this ruling is not as big as people have made it out to be over the past 24 hours. This is actually a blip. I think the unanimity of the court is something that is good for John Roberts' court. He had to have a unanimous ruling. It's as if John Roberts went out and said, okay, it's going to be unanimous, and how do we back into that ruling? Because he is someone who actually recently has taken a keen eye to the way that the court is viewed and will be viewed, and his tenure will be viewed throughout history. The ruling that is going to be the most interesting, and you stated it earlier, is the ruling on immunity and presidential immunity, and the fact that they're actually going to hear this, and the fact that they didn't allow just the D.C. Court of Appeals ruling to take effect. And so we'll see what happens, and I anticipate some healthy arguments over the next, 30, 40 days when this hearing happens.
Yeah, so we can just kind of remind everyone of what these trial dates look like, because the first one is going to be, I think we can throw it up on the screen, the hush money case, which is going to start on March 25th. That's when jury selection starts in that one. Then, of course, there's the election subversion trial. That's this question of immunity that the Supreme Court is currently deciding. So on April 22nd, the Supreme Court is going to hear oral arguments as to whether or not Trump is immune from prosecution in that particular case. Then we have the classified documents case. Then we have the Georgia election subversion case, which, of course, has been kind of derailed by this push to try to disqualify Fani Willis from it all here. Zolan, when you kind of look at all of this, I mean, how do you see this playing out as, and again, I'm focusing on this because this really does feel like today is going to be the first day of the general election with Trump kind of set to sweep in all of these states and be set on a glide path to be the nominee. I mean, that's what Republican voters are choosing.
No, 100%. You have the convergence of sort of our judiciary, our justice system, and politics right now. I think one of the more consequential, sort of important moments last year in terms of politics was not even necessarily the indictments of President Trump, but how his base reacted to the indictments each and every time, how it galvanized them, how it only built support, both amongst seemingly primary voters, but also amongst the Republican Party in general, at least when it comes to the House. So now as we turn to the general election, as you have more updates to these court cases, it'll be interesting to see as he starts to want to win over more independent voters as well, just how much impact these cases have, whether it continues to be a boon for him.
Kristen, what do you hear from voters about like kind of which of these is the most important kind of thing to focus on? I mean, I was talking to one smart Republican strategist in New Hampshire when I was up there around the primary, and he had actually pointed to the classified documents case as being a big problem with voters. Do you think that that's the case?
To me, that's one that is kind of the sleeper issue, right? There's a lot of heat around the election subversion case. That's one where he's been the most sort of vocally angry about, whether it's the prosecution down in Georgia, the judge, Tanya Chutkan here in D.C. in the D.C. case. But I think it's the classified documents one that, to me, there are implications for your average voter there that are, this is how we're storing our documents. Now, this makes me feel very unsafe. This feels like it was very avoidable if the documents had just been given back. He made this mess himself. And because it is, I think, tied to national security, I think that's why if you are an independent voter, it makes Trump seem reckless, potentially. Oh my gosh, we're going to put this guy back in charge of our national security again. Now, because there's so much around this case that's classified, I'm unsure exactly how much the public will see about it, but I somewhat agree with that assessment that could wind up being the one that has the biggest impact.
What do you think?
Couple things. She has a point. That was when it first broke, that was the case where the most Republicans had, I would say, veiled, but still critiques more than the other ones. I think on a strategic level, if you're the Trump campaign, you want to, again, smash all of these court cases together as much as possible. Because, like, let's face it, I get paid to do this. Still can't keep all of the facts in every case straight, let alone the average voter who is not paying attention as closely as we all are to this. You have to remember that.
Because they have other jobs.
This
is
real
our job.
Lives, real lives, yeah. Right? Yes, exactly. But also on a tactical level, from what I've heard, I would look at, again, he'll be in the courtroom all day in any of these cases. He'll come out. Does he do kind of a COVID-style press conference, right? They were very popular at the beginning, but then he just started making stuff up and just saying stuff to get on camera. That's when they went off the rails real quick. Does that sort of thing happen here? Because, again, the campaign in the courtroom for the next 6 months will be very close to one and the same.
You also, I mean, I hear the points about New York being the weakest case. However, and maybe we're just desensitized to this, but however, how many times can you hear in open court throughout the airwaves that somebody cheated on their pregnant wife with a porn star, and this is the reason that the money was paid for Michael Cohen, et cetera, and this is how it was done, and these are how the finances were done. And that's going to be drilled over and over and over and over by the prosecution in New York. I do think that eventually there are some voters, and we're not talking about Republican-based voters, because I don't think that's where this election is won. And you're the pollster. You would have to tell me whether or not I'm right or wrong. But I think this election is won in suburbs, and I think it's really won with college-educated white women in particular. Those individuals who came home with Joe Biden, who may or may not leave Joe Biden. I can't imagine that they appreciate that.
But I think Donald Trump is not a good guy. It's kind of already priced in for a lot of those voters. I think they've already, I mean, when you see it in the question, are you favorable or unfavorable to X, Y, and Z? And the bargain that a lot of these voters have made is, I don't think he's a good guy. I don't expect him to be an angel. I do expect him to make my 401k look better. I do expect him to make.
Well, if that's the case, then they need to vote for Joe Biden. Because, I mean, people's 401ks when you wake up this morning, I mean, it's like, thank you, Joe.
Voters aren't feeling that
Brandon.
great yet.
Let's face it, Ricardo,
last word.
if you're talking about those exact types of voters, far more impactful of an argument than Donald Trump's a bad guy is the abortion decision. That is one I think that will be far more impactful for those suburban, especially college-educated
Give
white
it to
women.
them all. Let them just have the whole plethora of information.
All right. Our panel is going to stay with us. But up next here, the Supreme Court temporarily froze a controversial Texas immigration law. We'll talk about that. Plus, Nikki Haley hears boos while campaigning in Texas.
The Supreme Court ruled today that Donald Trump could stay on the ballot. And no, I think that was important. We don't ever want.
All right, a live look at Raleigh, North Carolina on this Super Tuesday. The sun's up. It's almost 6:30 right here on the East Coast. Polls are opening there. We also have a look at Richmond, Virginia. They've been able to vote for about half an hour there in our neighboring state. And here's Houston, Texas. Polls open in about 90 minutes. Still pretty dark out there. It should be fairly calm for the majority of states with voters headed to these polls for Super Tuesday. You could see that in some of those pictures. Weather's not a huge problem. Let's get straight to our weatherman, Derek Van Dam. Derek, good morning. Where should we be watching to see if voting today is going to get affected by anything that you are paying super close attention to?
Yeah, maybe not a big deal, but something we need to consider as you head out the door this morning. Do I grab that umbrella, the raincoat, that type of thing? And there is the potential for severe weather, so we'll highlight all of that. 15 states. We've got them highlighted here on this particular map from the West Coast. Northern California getting another rainstorm for the coastal areas to mountain snow for the higher elevations. Here's a severe weather threat, eastern Texas. That extends into Arkansas. Both of those states actually going to the polls today. And some wet weather along the East Coast impacting places like Virginia all the way to Massachusetts, also reaching the polls. So just a general overview, lots of wet weather. That is the name of the game from Atlanta to Little Rock all the way to Shreveport, Louisiana. This is a current radar. Look at that little spin in that storm system entering the East Coast. That is bringing rainfall to the Delmarva Peninsula. This is the major rainmaker entering the Florida Peninsula, Panhandle, I should say, right now. And those are some stronger storms over eastern Texas, so could impact the state there, and that extends into central portions of Arkansas. We do have a marginal risk. That's a level 1 of 5 from the Storm Prediction Center. Large hail, damaging winds can't quite be ruled out, but the bigger story here will be the rain. So ponding on the roadways will be a possibility. Here's our flash flood threat for the day today. That extends from Atlanta to Birmingham, southward to Montgomery and Tallahassee. You saw on the radar, very, very active. Moving in from the Gulf of Mexico, lots of moisture. And I've got to get this in because, yeah, Casey, we officially measured over 10 feet of snow in California from our 5-day blizzard that seemed like it would never end, but it's officially ended now.
Yeah, Californians voting today, too. And I should note that 10 feet, that's like
Correct.
3 feet taller than Shaq. We were talking about how the forecast was that it was going to be over Shaq's head.
It's verified. That's
Okay.
what matters.
Derek Van Dam, our weatherman. Derek, thank you very much.
Have a great day.
All right. Donald Trump is calling the Supreme Court's decision to keep him on Colorado's 2024 ballot a, quote, big win for America, end quote. And so, too, is his only remaining Republican challenger, Nikki Haley, despite some mixed reaction from the crowd there.
The Supreme Court ruled today that Donald Trump could stay on the ballot. And no, I think that was important. We don't ever want some elected official in a state or anybody else saying who can and can't be on a ballot. This is America.
Haley also told that same Texas crowd she will beat Trump, quote, fair and square. Our panel's back with us. Kristen, listening to that crowd, I mean, that sounds like a bunch of Democrats, if I'm being honest, right? Like I'm happy Trump's on the ballot and she gets booed. Like, who do you think those people are?
Those are people who are voting for Nikki Haley because they want to send a message. Please don't give us these two options. Please give us something different. They are not at that Nikki Haley rally because they also kind of like Donald Trump. But I think it is smart for her to take this position because, first of all, I do think that even if you are a voter who's in the center and you don't like Donald Trump, the idea of the Supreme Court taking this away from you probably wouldn't sit quite well. But also, she's got a potentially long career in politics. I don't think that she wants to put herself fully into the never Trump wing of the party because it'll be hard to come back from that over the long term. So this is her way, I think, of saying, look, I'm different. I don't think that we should pick him this time. He's not the right guy for the moment, but I don't want the establishment, big institutions to be the ones stopping him from being president if he's the nominee.
Let's take a look at how the Biden campaign responded to the ruling yesterday when one of their spokespeople was on TV yesterday. Watch.
What is your reaction to all of that?
Well, first of all, I'm really excited to be here with you guys, but we don't really care because it's not been the way that we've been planning to beat Donald Trump. Our focus since day one of launching this campaign has been to defeat Donald Trump at the ballot box.
Not that different from what Nikki Haley's saying, Bakari. Just we don't really care that this is how this played out.
I agree with that. I mean, outside a few of the people on the fringes, on the fringe left, that may be their point. I don't think that the Colorado ruling was legally sound. I mean, I don't want to bore people at 6 o'clock and put them back to sleep.
You wouldn't, Bakari. You're fascinating at all hours of the day.
I appreciate you. Or go through the legal reasonings that it was on shaky ground. But the president of the United States has said this, and people around the president have said this. I mean, they haven't been running a campaign against Nikki Haley. They've been running a campaign against Joe Biden for the last 3 or 4 years.
You mean Donald Trump?
Joe Biden has been running a campaign against Donald Trump, correct. And so I anticipate that to continue. You cannot have a country where Bakari Sellers is kicked off the ballot in Texas, but on the ballot in New York. I mean, that is the definition of a legal slippery slope.
It's not so much. Yeah, I agree. From what I hear from people around the campaign, even the White House, it's not so much looking at sort of the decision here. One thing I do know that Biden allies, the campaign, and the White House are looking at is as these weeks go by and as you get deeper into the general election, some are hoping that voters become clear-eyed that it looks like Trump is going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. I've talked to plenty of Democrats that say that would benefit them. It would almost back the argument that you'll probably hear more and more in the weeks to come, where the White House tries to draw a contrast directly with the former president, calling him out by name, like we saw last week at the border as well, with a sort of split screen with President Biden and the former president. So not necessarily the court cases, but I do think you're hoping that the campaign hopes that voters realize that Trump is going to be the nominee, likely.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, this is a big part of what I hear from Democrats when they talk about whether it's the polling that doesn't look great for the president or concerns about his age or whatever it might be. A lot of times they will say, well, voters don't actually believe that Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. They just don't think it's possible. And that when they do realize that, it will become less a referendum on Biden, more a direct contest. I mean, do you buy that? I do get the sense that there are more voters and more, honestly, people. I see this in my own life who are checked out of politics than there were, while the Trump administration was still in town. And do you think that plays into this at all?
Yes, I think the latter point, absolutely. I think people follow this a lot further away than we all do. Yes, but I also don't necessarily agree that people are in some sort of daze where they haven't been paying attention to the news and don't really realize that Donald Trump is a commanding lead for the primary. That sounds like a little bit of an excuse on their part. I think what we're seeing with the Biden campaign is this push and pull among what they actually are talking about. You had Mike Donilon, who's extremely close to the president, saying we're going to talk about democracy. Then you had, for frequent guest of this show, David Axelrod, kind of mocking it, saying that people aren't sitting around a table.
There's somebody who's not close to the White House. It's David Axelrod.
But he has some sense, I think, of what to talk about. He was saying that people aren't sitting around in Scranton talking about democracy. And there's this push and pull. You give the first speech of your reelect, the other before the end of the year on democracy. Within about 10 days, he starts talking about kitchen table issues are going to decide this election. There's this really kind of push and pull. Are we talking about some more esoteric things or more tactical economic things?
Well, Biden is really personally motivated by the democracy issue.
Exactly.
And, I mean, I think any campaign would say you got to lean into where your candidate is most comfortable.
Not always the best campaign managers, and that's a tough part.
I think you'll see this coming up on Thursday in the State of the Union. I mean, I think you'll see the theme of democracy, because you have somebody who's kind of ripped at the fabric of democracy. But you also have a president who has been very consequential and actually has successes. And I'm not even talking about the individual successes he's had as a Democratic president, but the bipartisan successes, the soft landing after COVID that nobody thought was possible, a bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, putting up justices that were, bipartisanly appointed. So these things are.
They should just send you out on the campaign trail, Bakari. You just said it all there.
I have five-year-old twins.
But what you're hitting on is the balance that I'm looking to see if they strike. Not just contrasting themselves with Trump by talking about democracy, but also the polls that have been concerning to this White House in the most case are that voters actually don't understand still all of what's contained in the Inflation Reduction Act and infrastructure
It's not
package.
understand, it's feel.
Right.
The voters don't
They
feel it.
see their
That's
own
right.
grocery bill,
Right.
and they're like, the Inflation Reduction Act, what?
Like,
Which
why-
makes the
why is
message
my-
even
why
more
is my
important.
milk- My daddy was complaining about the price of whiting the other day, and the price of whiting at Piggly Wiggly has gone up. I mean, these are real type of issues that people are. I mean, it's a good fish to fry.
No, for sure. All right, our panel's going to stay with us. Up next here, a reminder of what a second Trump administration might look like. Plus, the city of Miami breaking up with spring breakers.
There was a full Inspector General's report that the Trump White House was a pill mill, and then a new report yesterday that said the Trump White House was just handing out speed and Xanax like candy, and that story just came and went because there's too much going on. We didn't have time to talk about it. Us.
Seth Meyers joking about a defense inspector general's report that said stimulants were readily handed out during the Trump administration to their staffers. Now, why on earth, Kristen, would they have needed such things? What was going on? This made me flash back to just how intense it was when the Trump team was running Washington. And for today, on Super Tuesday, the specter of that happening again is really very real. It's going to be more real at the end of today. The general election polling really shows that right now, if the election was held today, Donald Trump would more than likely end up becoming president of the United States again. And this is also part of, I think, where the campaigns are and where the Joe Biden team thinks they need to be in terms of underscoring, reminding people what was it like when Trump was in charge in Washington. And all of his staffers needing stimulants really spoke to me in terms of I could have used some myself trying to cover it all.
Well, a big way that Joe Biden was able to defeat Donald Trump 4 years ago was by saying, look at all this chaos and mayhem. Aren't you tired? Don't you want to stop this? Vote for me. I will stop the chaos. The problem for Joe Biden is that the last 3 years have not necessarily felt less chaotic, less divisive. And so he doesn't have the luxury this time around of running and saying, if you put me in charge, you won't have to think about who's president anymore. You won't have to worry about this anymore. Part of that is Joe Biden's age, being a little bit older, sort of lends itself to this argument of, is this actually going to be stable or could this be relatively chaotic? But I do think that while Biden had a huge advantage on that attribute 4 years ago, that has now gone away. And voters are like, well, if both Biden and Trump are going to lead kind of chaotic times, maybe Trump's policies are a little bit better for me, and so I'll take the bad with the good. I think that's a bargain a lot of voters are making right now.
Bakari, how do you see this? Because, I mean, I will say the pace that you had to keep up with all of the things that were happening when Donald Trump was in the White House was insane.
Yeah, no, I think that was a very good point that you made. There was so much chaos and mayhem that was a part of the Trump White House, the Trump Twitter feeds. I mean, we would sit here on air and, I remember sitting on State of the Union with Jake Tapper and we get in our earpiece. Well, he just tweeted. And then, the news cycle kind of changes into what he just tweeted about because he's tweeting out foreign policy. He's doing all of these things. There is a difference, though, between that Trump and this Trump. And I think it's the people around him just in this particular moment. Trump's campaign is actually very sound. And the people running his campaign are very disciplined. Jason Miller and his team are very, very disciplined. Now, their candidate goes off on tangents quite often. They're doing the best they can with what they have. But at least there is some semblance of structure around the president. That is something that Joe Biden's going to have to push through and continue to break. And there's going to be a variety of messaging because another 4 years of Trump is still going to be chaos. And they are both, I have to reframe this argument a little bit. They are both old, okay? People like to say Joe Biden is old. Well, Donald Trump is old, too. That should be breaking
People
news.
just don't seem to think that, right? Like, they think Joe Biden is old. They attribute that to him.
How old is Donald Trump?
He is 3 years younger than Joe Biden.
Old.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying the polls show voters don't seem to think so.
86% for Biden. I can't get 86% of people to say that your sweater is red, like red or maroon. Like it's like that is a wild statement.
It's not red.
It's with reddish. The family.
That was terrible.
Maroon.
It's definitely red.
Yeah.
It's a reddish. Yeah. I'm a guy, but
I'm a guy.
Oh
yeah.
my God.
It's
Continue.
the family.
It's fine. I forgive
But like, I agree with what Kristen and Bakari said to an extent. The Trump campaign, from what it was in 15 and 16, I mean, it's really disciplined, remarkably well run, remarkably organized. You're going to see a huge delegate lead at the end of the night tonight, likely because of what the organization in the prior years have done in states like California, where taking it away from proportional allocation in a lot of these congressional districts to making 50% plus one get all the delegates. So he's going to romp in California, where if this was in 2016, he might get a plurality of delegates. And also, if he comes into power, if you remember, they had that first wave on the beach, so to speak, where a lot of former RNC hands. You had Sean Spicer, you had Reince Priebus, you had people who were hopeful that we can kind of keep a lid on things and tame. And by the end, by end of 2020, it was just kind of a rowdy band of pirates, so to
Sean
speak.
Spicer outside the window of the White House in the grass. Yeah.
Yeah. So
remember that?
It's true.
I blocked out some of the things that I covered in the Trump administration. I'm not going to lie.
But you're going to have that starting this time. And I think they are far more organized of what they want to do immediately upon entering office than they were.
How does the Biden team look at all this?
I was just going to say, I mean, one thing that I think you're going to see, well, I'm interested in seeing, is how they, again, sort of continue to try to draw the contrast of the chaos that could be to come. Not just pointing out, as you said, there's less of these sort of chaotic moments than maybe 2016 during the campaign. It's more disciplined now. So now, if you're the Biden campaign, the White House, you're focusing on some of the policy proposals they put up. I mean, just through my lens, I tend to write about immigration a lot, and I know that the Biden campaign and the White House have been highlighting, look, if you thought that the first term was extreme, look at what is being proposed for this upcoming term, with potentially trying to end birthright citizenship, more travel bans, more travel restrictions, seismic changes at the border, scaling up entire camps for undocumented immigrants. So it's not just that issue, not just that policy. I'm looking to see how the White House and the campaign looks at policy proposals and policies to come to draw the contrast.
That's going to be huge, particularly in states like Minnesota, where you can talk about his immigration bill, and one of the first things that the former president of the United States did was a Muslim ban, and where you're having an issue such as Gaza, which is on the forefront of a lot of the things that Democratic voters are caring about right now. The question that the White House is posing is, are you really going to sit out this election or jump out over me to vote for somebody whose first policy proposal was chaotic and was a Muslim ban? And that is a question that they're asking voters.
We're actually going to get an interesting test in Minnesota on whether there's an uncommitted faction there. I'm not going to even try.
That was good. That was good.
Very good. I'm impressed. Panel, stay with us, please. It is 49 past the hour. We've got your morning roundup. 5 people are dead after their small plane slammed into the shoulder of Nashville's Interstate 40. Terrifying. The aircraft exploded into flames upon impact. It closed eastbound traffic. The Supreme Court temporarily freezing a Texas law that allows police to arrest anyone suspected of being in the country illegally. It's not clear which way the court might lean on this. And Jeff Bezos reclaiming the title of richest person on earth. Bloomberg's Billionaires Index says Bezos' net worth is $200 billion. That is followed all by Elon Musk. He's only got $198 billion. And Miami Beach releasing a new ad campaign. They are trying to break up with spring breakers.
You just want to get drunk in public and ignore laws.
Do you even remember what happened last March? That was our breaking point, so we're breaking up with you.
And don't try to apologize and come.
Okay. This year, the city is going to have stricter rules, including curfews, bag checks, restricted beach access, and more. Be careful out there. All right, still ahead here on CNN This Morning. Who says there's no crying in football? First, this stunning realization from comedian Jon Stewart.
Breaking news this morning, the United States Supreme Court ruling that former President Donald Trump cannot be removed from any state's ballot.
I think the real breaking news here is Wolf Blitzer and I appear to be merging. We are becoming one. Trump can still be president if he's convicted. I mean, none of the cases would stop that.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up, John. Democrats say if none of these cases go their way, there is still another avenue to pursue.
The getting more votes scenario.
They're not there yet.
Jon Stewart back with all of us. Never fails to disappoint. All right, let's do final thoughts and predictions on this Super Tuesday. Kristen, what are you watching for today?
I'm looking to see, does Nikki Haley win any state? And if she doesn't, does she persist in the race past tonight? Or does she decide, I made my case, my faction is a large enough piece of the party, but I'm going to walk away now?
Zolan, what are you thinking?
I'm looking at California. I think there's an interesting race out there. Do you have a potential sort of inter-party, contest between Adam Schiff and Katie Porter?
Yeah, let me back you up because you're talking about the California Senate race,
Correct.
which I agree is super interesting, and it's a jungle primary, so it's not like we're going to get two people out of this race. We know
That's
Adam
right.
Schiff is going to be one of them, right?
Right.
So talk about this other piece.
And then it's effectively sort of a contest to see who gets that second slot. And right now you have Schiff and allies actually investing money in a Republican challenger so that he doesn't have so much of a tight contest, possibly with Katie Porter moving forward. I mean, we've seen that strategy before in politics, but interested to see how it plays out here.
Yeah, I wonder if it'll come back to bite him. I don't know. Bakari, what are you watching?
The differences between the primaries and the caucuses in the Republic, I mean, this is kind of nuanced and in the weeds. I think Nikki Haley would do pretty well in Alaska and Utah because those are caucuses, those aren't primaries. And I think she'll win Maine. So I'm calling it. Nikki Haley wins 3 states tonight. She goes up, she bats 100%.
I'm writing it down. Okay.
She bats 100% in the caucuses. That's Alaska and Utah.
Alaska?
And she wins Maine.
She wins Maine. All right, I think you're coming back tomorrow, right?
I'll be here in the morning.
Can we hold you accountable? Okay.
Yes, I might have on the same thing, but I will be here.
I will be here. I will not be wearing the same thing.
Will it be red?
I don't think anyone would approve. It might not be red. Anyway, Matt, what are you looking for for Tuesday?
What I'm looking for, honestly, California Senate race, obviously, as well. Also, Sheila Jackson Lee is in a very tough primary down
Congresswoman in Texas,
yes, who is often on this network and others, very visible, longtime member of Congress. She went to run for Houston mayor, kind of took her off the ball a little bit. Somebody was in the race to succeed her, stayed in the race when she went back to her House seat, and has raised a lot of money. I wouldn't be surprised if Sheila Jackson Lee
Her name is Amanda Edwards.
Amanda Edwards,
She'll
yeah.
be very young. She'll add a lot of youth to this very aging body up here.
Interesting note from Bakari. Kristen, let me circle back to what you were saying, because I am actually really interested in your take on what you think if Haley wants to have a future in politics, like what she should do, because there is this question of, should she drop out? What is the best timing for her? And also, should she endorse Trump? What do you think?
So I think staying in the race much longer past tonight is a potential problem. If she pulls off these 3 states that Bakari has picked, maybe that gives you the reason to stay around a little bit longer. The longer she stays in the race, the more likely it is that Donald Trump tries to pin a general election loss on her and people like her. Now, it's possible he'll do this anyways, right? If Donald Trump loses, he never says it's always not his fault. But to be able to say, hey, I would have won if only those establishment rhino Republicans hadn't sold me out. The longer she stays in the race, the longer that can stick. With that said, I think if she puts herself in a position where it seems like she's trying to help Joe Biden beat Donald Trump at all, that does make it really hard for her, at least in the short term, to have a future in the party. But nothing in politics is forever.
We all know Nikki Haley is going to endorse Donald Trump eventually, right? Like, this is who Nikki Haley is. I mean, she will. I mean, I've known Nikki Haley a very long. Yeah, I've known Nikki Haley a very long time. As far as she walks out on that ledge saying this and that about Donald Trump, she's going to come back and say he's not Joe Biden. This is for America. Blah 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 blah.
I remember
final thought.
She worked for him, right? Yeah. And so we often forget that. It gets lost in it. So I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah. All right. Zolan, Kristen, Bakari, Matt, great conversation to kick off Super Tuesday. I will leave you with this.
Where I announce that I am retiring. Where I announce I'm retiring from the NFL
after 13 seasons with the Philadelphia Eagles.
In the city of brotherly love, Jason Kelce saying goodbye to the game he loves. A 7-time Pro Bowler, likely future Hall of Famer. He spent his entire NFL career with the Eagles. We love him. He thanked his coaches, teammates, fans, family, and notably his brother Travis.
There is no chance I'd be here without the bond Travis and I share. It's only too poetic I found my career being fulfilled in the city of brotherly love. I knew that relationship all too well.
Eagles owner Jeffrey Lurie put it this way: has there ever been a more perfect marriage between a player, a city, and a team? Quick shout out to Kylie Kelce, who refused to wear any other team's jersey. Go Birds. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I'm Casey Hunt. Don't go anywhere. CNN News Central starts right now.
It's a Super Tuesday. Really, it's Super Tuesday. Millions of Americans are going to go to the polls to cast their votes in primaries and caucuses. This will be a decisive day for Nikki Haley's campaign as Donald Trump looks for sweeping wins to help him clinch the Republican nomination. And will today show any more signs of trouble for President Biden's re-election campaign?
An Air Force employee accused of sharing classified information on a foreign dating site. That man now under arrest.
And CNN takes you to the capital of Haiti as violent gangs rule the city and residents live in fear. I'm Sarah Seidner with Kate Baldwin. John Berman is in Colorado for Super Tuesday. We will see him in just a bit. CNN News Central starts right now.
There are Tuesdays, and then there are Super Tuesdays, friends. The election day energy filling the air. I know you can feel it this early in the morning. Right now, polls are open in 7 states. Next hour, 4 more states will be joining them, and that continues throughout the day, throughout the morning, as millions of voters will be casting their Super Tuesday ballots. So while few things are certain in life these days, we well know, one thing that does seem almost assured is that by the end of the night, the needle will be moving closer to deciding the general election matchup. 865 Republican delegates are up for grabs today. And for all of those keeping track at home, right now, Donald Trump has 276, meaning tonight he could get really quite close to securing the nomination, which requires 1,215 delegates. For President Biden, today's less about the delegate math and more about his campaign learning a lot more about his ability to get Democratic voters excited for the potential of a second Biden term. John Berman in Castle Rock, Colorado. Happy Super Tuesday to all of those who celebrate, John.
Happy Super Tuesday, Kate Baldwin and Sarah Seidner. The polls are open in Castle Rock, Colorado, in a manner of speaking. That's because, in essence, the polls are always open in Colorado. The major means of voting here is by mail or by drop box. You can see the drop box right there behind me, voter ballot drop box, it says, which is a sign that it is a drop box. And we actually did just see a car drive in and a voter put a ballot right in there. Nearly 1 million people, nearly 1 million people have already voted here in Colorado. Most of them dropped their ballots off at boxes just like that one. You can also put them in the mail, although if you were going to mail them in, you would have had to have done it last week. There are in-person polling places that will be open today, but only a teeny tiny fraction of the people actually show up to vote in person here in Colorado. And I actually have a sample ballot. Let me walk around here and show this to you. This is the sample ballot from Colorado, and you will see that Donald Trump's name is on it. It has been on it, even with that Supreme Court case up in the air until yesterday. Of course, the court ruled that Donald Trump's name will remain on the ballot. The states do not have the right to remove Donald Trump or an insurrectionist from the ballot unilaterally. But his name was on the ballot anyway because the court had stayed the earlier ruling here. This is what the ballot looks like. That's what Republicans will be able to vote on today. That's what they're dropping off in that box here behind me. 15 states plus American Samoa. That is why this Tuesday is so super. Let's get to Virginia, where the polls are open. Our Elena Treen is there. Elena, what are you seeing so far?
Well, good morning. Yes, the polls opened here in Richmond, Virginia at 6 a.m. It's still pretty quiet here, John. We've seen some people come in, I think those eager to get to work or vote and then get to work who have come by. But I do expect this will pick up throughout the day. And, John, I do just want to share, how some of the Trump campaign is viewing this today, and specifically how they're viewing this state in particular here in Virginia. First of all, his campaign is very confident about Super Tuesday. They are really hoping to sweep most, if not all, of the states we're going to see voting today. But the other thing that they're also keeping an eye on is Nikki Haley, of course. They know that Nikki Haley has pledged to stay in through Super Tuesday, but it's still very unclear what she will do after today. And depending on her performance, if she will drop out. Their goal, or their hope, I should say, is that she will ultimately drop out. I know that Donald Trump and his team want him to be able to get on that stage tonight in Mar-a-Lago, where he's going to be having a watch party, and be able to declare victory and also declare himself the presumptive Republican nominee. But as you all mentioned at the top here, regardless of how many states Donald Trump wins and his performance here today, he will be shy of the necessary delegates to declare him the presumptive nominee. But their goal is to really keep building momentum here in Virginia and across the country in these different voting states, and try to convince a lot of the people who want a Trump alternative to get behind him. And that's not just Republican voters, but also Republican donors. They very much recognize that they want to have the infrastructure of the Republican Party behind him and the money that can come with that to really launch him into a better position for a general election rematch against Joe Biden. Now, about Virginia here specifically, this is a state that Donald Trump lost both in 2016 and in 2020. But from my conversations with Trump's senior advisors, they do see it as a battleground. That's how they've been describing it to me in our conversations. And they do think they can make a good play here. And it's not just about the primary, but also, again, looking ahead to a potential general election. And one thing I know they're going to be doing a lot of here in the state is, of course, building up their ground game strategy, but also really targeting suburban voters. They tell me that they think the economy, one of the top issues I know that Donald Trump plans to run on this year, is something that a lot of Virginia voters care about specifically. So you can expect that messaging as they look ahead.
Elena Treen in Richmond. Thank you so much, Elena. Now, as we said, this is Super Tuesday, but it may not be so super for some candidates, depending on how the results come in tonight. Let's go to Eva McKend, who is in Washington. Eva's been covering the campaign of Nikki Haley, and we really don't know much about what happens with that campaign past today, Eva, do we?
You know, John, she hasn't said what she's going to do past today. The big question is, can she decisively win any states tonight? I think tonight really serves as the ultimate test of her message. She's such a disciplined campaigner, and she has really stuck to this electability argument that she would be the best person to go up against Joe Biden in the fall. She's delivered that message in 10 states in the past week, but she has been very vague about concrete expectations, only saying that she will continue to run this race as long as we remain competitive. You know, with her, I was with her during her New England swing, and she was attracting Democrats, independents, and anti-Trump Republicans that said that they would rather vote for Joe Biden than vote for Trump in the fall. Let's take a listen to her core argument here.
At some point, maybe we should say the reason that America keeps losing is because of Donald Trump. We can change all of that. But in order to change it, it's going to take a lot of courage. Courage from everybody here. Courage for me to run. And courage for every one of you to know, don't complain about what happens in a general election if you don't vote in this primary.
So the hard truth facing Haley is that with each passing contest dominated by Trump, her odds of amassing a sizable number of delegates shrink. A little more than a third of Republican delegates are up for grabs. And some of these states are winner-take-all states, where I was in Vermont over the weekend, Maine, Massachusetts. If she doesn't get above 50%, that means she loses the chance to get all of the delegates in that state completely. Haley's team, though, they say that she will not address supporters tonight because the polls in some states close at a very late hour. But, John, she will be watching the results from her home state of South Carolina.
She will be watching, no doubt about that. Eva McKen, thank you very much. And we will be watching, not just here in Colorado, where I'm going to report every piece of activity that happens at that ballot box all morning long here, Sarah Seidner. But it's not just Colorado. As I said, 14 other states plus Colorado and American Samoa. A lot of activity today, Sarah.
There is. I know you'll be watching, and we'll get numbers, as you love to give us numbers all day long. Is that another person? No. All right. John Berman, great to see you out there. All right, still ahead, a massive industrial fire outside Detroit is sending debris flying more than a mile away. The flames now under control, but officials are still warning people this morning to stay away from the area. And a new crew has just arrived at their new home, hundreds of miles above Earth. We have their hug-filled welcome to the International Space Station. Also, violence and chaos in the streets of Haiti's capital. CNN was there as gangs take control of most of the city. We'll have that ahead.
So the longer you wait to act on Haiti, the more migrants there will be on our southern border. It's that simple.
This morning, newly released texts and emails are revealing how key Trump allies sought to keep him in office soon after the January 6th Capitol attack. Right-wing attorney Kenneth Chesebro helped come up with the fake electors plot. This footage, which was taken by Chesebro and has not been seen publicly, shows the fake electors casting their ballots in Wisconsin. And in one of the newly disclosed texts, talk of coordinating the plan with the Trump White House. CNN's Marshall Cohen is joining me now. Marshall, we haven't seen this before. Why is that? Why is it coming out now?
Hey, Sarah, there was a lawsuit in Wisconsin. The real electors from that state filed a civil case against the fake electors, and this came out as part of a settlement just yesterday. Hundreds of new texts, emails, photos, videos. You just saw the clip of the fake electors voting in Wisconsin, but there is so much more, and it is revealing that this fake electors plan was deeper than we thought. We're still learning new things, Sarah, almost 4 years later, 3 or 4 years later. Let's go through. I want to show you 3 things that we learned from this document dump. First is a text message exchange between Chesebro and Trump's top attorney in Wisconsin, Jim Troupis. This is in December 2020, and he says, Jim, can you send my December 6th memo to Trump lawyer Justin Clark? The messaging on January 6th being the real day is key. That memo is where he spelled out the fake electors plan. Troupis says, I have sent it to the White House this afternoon, the real decision makers. We didn't necessarily know that Troupis had sent that very detailed memo directly to the Trump White House. Now, he did not say in the messages who he sent it to, but that is notable because just a few weeks later, they carried out the plan in 7 states across the country. Trump electors cast their ballots. And then on January 6th, Trump tried to get Mike Pence to count those ballots. And who was in the crowd outside of the Capitol? None other than Ken Chesebro himself. Our K-File team broke that story last year, but we are now seeing brand new selfies, photos that he took that day. This is him outside of the Washington Monument, and the other photo you just saw with him in the red MAGA hat, that shows him in the front and Alex Jones in the back, the noted conspiracy theorist. But even after witnessing the carnage that day, Sarah, even with Chesebro in the crowd that day, he was still pushing to overturn the election. Look at this text from 2 days later, January 8th, 2021. He says to Troupis, the events of the last 2 days open up legal options in the states for winning rulings favorable to Trump. Sarah, after all that, he was still scheming, still pushing the plot.
Marshall Cohen, it really paints the picture with the text and looking at the video and seeing these new pictures. Thank you so much for breaking that all down for us. Kate?
Jury selection is beginning this morning in the trial of the father of the Michigan school shooter. Now, the father who bought the gun his teenage son used in what became the worst school shooting in Michigan state history. He killed 4 classmates. And now his father, James Crumbley, is charged with involuntary manslaughter. His mother was already convicted of the same charge, marking the first time a parent has been found guilty of homicide for a school shooting committed by their child. CNN's Jean Casares has been following all of this from the very beginning and throughout Jennifer Crumbley's trial as well. And during that trial, folks will remember, Jean, that the actions of James Crumbley played a prominent part in that trial.
Very much so, and that's why prosecutors are going to argue here that he should be convicted of homicide, because that's what he is charged with, just like his wife, that he caused the death of those 4 students at Oxford High School, even though his son independently pulled the trigger. You know, it was Thanksgiving 2021. Ethan had wanted a 9mm gun for a long time, kept asking. His dad and he texted back and forth. Those texts will come in, and his dad sort of blew him off, according to Jennifer Crumbley's testimony. Now, the parents had no idea why he wanted a 9mm. They had a couple of other guns. They were locked up. They were smaller guns. He wanted a bigger gun. On Good Friday, his dad said, all right, let's go to the gun shop. Let's see if they have any sales. They did. They got a 9mm for him, and it was 4 days later he committed that mass shooting. But I think a big issue today, it is the beginning of the trial. They are going to select the jury. But under the Constitution, a defendant has a right to a fair and impartial jury. Jennifer was just convicted 4 weeks ago. Yeah. It's the same courthouse, the same courtroom. And the defense tried to move this trial. They said, Your Honor, we can't get a fair jury. The emotions in this community are overtaken still by Jennifer Crumbley's trial. We need to go to another part of Michigan. She said no. So it's going to be right there with the same community that experienced that mass shooting.
Jury selection begins today, this morning. Just a little bit.
Yep.
Good to see you, Jean. She's going to be following all of it for us. Sarah?
All right, new stunning video. Ukraine says this is video of it sinking another Russian warship in the Black Sea as Ukrainian soldiers make a desperate plea for U.S. aid from the battlefield. Also, a small plane crashes right next to a Nashville highway. It bursts into flames, killing everyone on board. Ahead, what we know about the final moments before this deadly crash. New this morning, a naval attack in the Black Sea. Kyiv's military says Ukraine has destroyed a Russian patrol ship near the Kerch Strait, which separates Crimea from the coast of Russia. The attack comes as Ukraine is experiencing extreme pressure around the eastern city of Avdiivka. And an official says the Russians are increasing their personnel and operations there. CNN's chief international security correspondent Nick Payton-Walsh is in eastern Ukraine with the very latest. What are you learning about this naval attack? We have seen some of this before from Ukraine.
Yeah, it's becoming an extraordinary refrain, frankly, of the third year of this war. Ukraine's ability to project attack power into parts of the Black Sea where Russia would just a year ago have probably felt entirely safe with its fleet there. The Sergei Kotov patrol ship, according to Ukraine's defense intelligence, who say they carried out the operation worth $65 million. Ukraine saying that what they call a Magura V5 attack drone hit it. Now, this has happened multiple times before, often to high priority, high value vessels, and it has frankly caused part of Russia's fleet, which would feel very comfortable in the ports of Crimea that it annexed 10 years ago to the day almost. Now they've had to move back closer towards Russia's mainland coast. An extraordinary development here. But this and other issues we've heard from Ukraine, where they've claimed extraordinary successes inside Russia, hitting a bridge 500 miles in this morning. A Russian official in Belgorod saying infrastructure appears to have been hit after a drone attack. Very much success stories that are unexpected for Ukraine's strategic ability to project power but in quite stark contradiction to how difficult things clearly are for Ukraine on the most important thing, their front lines inside the country itself. Now we hear repeated suggestions of difficulty around a key front line near where I'm standing to the west of Avdiivka. Ukraine gave that up 2 weekends ago voluntarily, but they said they'd hold a defensive line to its west. They gave up a bit of villages between that, and now they seem to be under extraordinary pressure around 3 villages of minimal consequence themselves, Olivka, Berediche, Tanenke. Ukraine says they're holding them. Some Ukrainian bloggers suggest there's intense pressure. The point is not these villages themselves. The point is if Ukraine is unable to hold that defensive line, there could be a knock-on effect, because frankly we're not seeing extensive fortifications behind those areas on our trips around the front line, and there are fears, I think, that Ukraine has been ill-prepared for a continued Russian advance here. They're throwing everything at it, frankly, and that may be a very difficult few months ahead, because it comes exactly when Western aid supplies and ammunition are running out, Sarah.
And they have been asking the United States to help them. We will see what happens here. Nick Payton-Walsh, thank you for being there and reporting on this important story. Kate?
Classified information about Ukraine shared on a dating website. Now, an Air Force employee is under arrest. A little more on that in a second. And the COVID pandemic, it actually killed off one strain of the flu. What that now means for the flu vaccine ahead.
On our radar for you this morning, the FAA is investigating this deadly plane crash in Tennessee. 5 people were killed when the small plane exploded into flames on the shoulder of Interstate 40 in Nashville. Investigators say the pilot reported engine and power failure and was approved for emergency landing at a nearby airport, but the pilot later told air traffic control they would not make it to the tarmac. All right, right now, a massive industrial fire is still burning outside of Detroit. It is creating major concerns about air quality and safety. Officials are urging the public to stay away from the area as they don't know what exactly is burning or the effects of the smoke and air. Take a look at this video caught by bystanders overnight as the fire created explosions, sending debris flying as far away as a mile. At least 3 ladder trucks have been on site overnight fighting that blaze. And 3 NASA astronauts and a Russian cosmonaut have officially boarded the International Space Station this morning. The crew can be seen hugging their fellow space travelers. Wow, that's some hug. That's some entanglement there. Kate, don't start with me.
I'm sorry, I just turned, and that is a special type of hug. I mean, I guess it's how you hug an International Space Station. But I turned, and that is not what I was expecting to see, Sarah.
That might be a bit much at, 7 o'clock in the morning, but whatever.
No, never. I mean, that's what we call a koala hug in my house.
By the way, that looks like happiness, but there are now 11 people aboard the ISS. That's a lot. The crew members.
That video. That's just what you needed them for.
That's a lot of folks. The members of Crew 8 are expected to remain on the space station until the fall and conduct over 200, this is important, Kate, scientific experiments during their stay. But it is going to be crowded, and there's going to be a lot of love.
I mean, one of those experiments is going to get knocked over with an elbow. You just know that's going to go down. They're going to be like, here we go. That was billions of dollars. I'm just kidding. We're going to need to run that later in the show, just because that's what we need on Tuesday morning. Bear hugs, koala hugs, International Space Station hugs. Okay, let's move on. The Supreme Court has put a pause on a controversial Texas immigration law that was set to take effect just days from now. This is the latest push, really, by the Texas governor and top state officials to crack down on illegal immigration. Essentially, what they're basically trying to do is take matters into their own hands. The law would allow state law enforcement to arrest and detain people that they suspect of entering the country illegally. CNN's Rosa Flores is tracking all of this from Houston. The Supreme Court saying, for the moment, hold on there. So, Rosa, what's happening now?
For now, we wait, but Allow me to detour for just a second, Kate, because there's similar news coming out of Arizona. And really, when you look at Arizona and the state of Texas, it's night and day when it comes to migration issues, when it comes to what the governor there is doing. In the state of Arizona, the legislature passed a very similar law to the one here in the state of Texas, but the governor there vetoed it. And of course, the governor is a Democrat, and the governor of the state of Texas is a Republican. So while that measure in Arizona is not moving forward, here in the state of Texas, it's still a quagmire when it comes to this fight between the state of Texas and the federal government. And this is just the latest battle. And let me get you up to speed as to what is happening with this, because over the weekend, the Fifth Circuit granted the state of Texas a stay and ordered that this law, this controversial law, go into effect if the Supreme Court didn't act. Well, the Supreme Court acted. It froze this case for now, but if the Supreme Court doesn't move further, then this law would actually go into effect on March 13th. Now, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton taking this as a victory, issuing a statement saying, quote, SB 4 was adopted to address the ongoing crisis at the southern border, which hurts Texans more than anyone else. Now, the arguments made by the state of Texas in the lower court gives us a sense of what the justices are going to consider. And the main argument by the state of Texas is that the state of Texas is under a, quote, invasion by migrants. Now, the lower court, the judge there rejected the argument by the state of Texas, saying that migrants crossing the border illegally is not technically a, quote, invasion. In fact, the lower court upheld precedent, which is that immigration is a federal function. Now, I want to read you a few excerpts from the lower court judge because it just gives you an idea of his thinking. First of all, he said, quote, surges in immigration do not constitute an invasion within the meaning of the Constitution, nor is Texas engaging in war by enforcing SB 4. He goes on to say, if allowed to proceed, SB 4 could open the door to each state passing its own version of immigration laws. SB 4 threatens the fundamental notion that the United States must regulate immigration with one voice. Governor Greg Abbott, of course, disagrees with all of this, and he maintains that the state of Texas has constitutional authority to do all of this. Now, I can't emphasize enough the concern by the Latino community in the state of Texas, which constitutes about 40% of the population of the state, because of the consideration that many people believe that this could lead to racial profiling. And Kate, that is a very serious issue, taken very seriously here in the state of Texas. We're just going to have to see what happens as this goes through the courts. Kate?
Absolutely. Rosa, thank you so much for the reporting. Let's go back out to Colorado now on this Super Tuesday. John Berman is there.
It is a Super Tuesday. We've now seen 6 voters drive up and put their ballots in that drop box right behind me, one of 400 drop boxes that operate 24 hours a day here. So as we said, the polls are open. In-person voting here in Colorado begins in about 90 minutes. In Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, polls have been open for more than an hour now. One of the other Super Tuesday states we're, of course, watching very closely. And joining us now is the Democratic senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia, Senator Tim Kaine. Senator, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I imagine you're a little warmer than I am standing here outside in Colorado. When Donald Trump went to visit your state and campaign in your state, you put out a tweet that noted that you think Donald Trump threatens the core of democracy. How?
By threatening an independent judiciary, by threatening a free press, by attacking his opponents, both Democrats and Republicans, by threatening a professional civil service and stating his plan to turn the civil service into a bunch of loyalists, political loyalists, rather than people who will focus on serving constituents. And he is the man who fomented the attack on the Capitol on January 6th because he couldn't admit that he lost, and he was willing to help encourage violence to try to block the peaceful transfer of power. Donald Trump has shown America who he is. He's going to be every bit the same individual and probably worse. And that's why it's so important that we rally around Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and make sure that Donald Trump loses.
In his new profile in The New Yorker, Evan Osnos interviewed President Biden, and Evan thinks that President Biden agrees with you that a central issue, if not the central issue, to this campaign is democracy and are the threats to democracy. My question, though, is to what extent do you think people sitting around their kitchen table having breakfast this morning are talking about threats to democracy as opposed to the economy or the border? How important do you think that issue is?
John, what we saw in 2022 was a lot of people predicted it was going to be a horrible midterm for Democrats. It wasn't. And in 2023, we in Virginia had elections in our state legislature, and Democrats won both houses of the legislature, even though we have a Republican governor. And my belief is Democrats' performance in 2022 and 2023 was because of people's worry about democracy, people's worry about their rights being taken away in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision, and those led Democrats to do very well. I do also think the economy is very, very important. I spent all day yesterday in the Hampton Roads area, Virginia, talking to small businesses and hearing their stories of survival through COVID and what's happening since. But you see unemployment down, jobs up, manufacturing jobs up, inflation coming down, GDP and the stock market up, and the U.S. economy recovering out of COVID better than any other industrialized nation. We're not where we need to be yet. People still have concerns about inflation and prices, but I think the economic news has been positive for a long time, and in Virginia, people are starting to see that. So these are all issues that are very important, but I think they're issues that will give us a tailwind as Democrats going into 2024 election cycle.
In that New Yorker profile, President Biden noted, he goes, "I'm the only one who has beat," those were his words, "I'm the only one who has beat Donald Trump." And I don't think he was saying that as any kind of criticism to you or Hillary Clinton, who were on the ticket in 2016. He was just noting he is the one who beat Donald Trump. And he thinks, because he says this to people, that he is the only one who can beat him now. Do you think that President Biden is the only one who could defeat Donald Trump in 2024?
You know, John, I actually recall Joe Biden saying something different. He says he thinks there are many people who can beat Donald Trump, but he is the only one who has beaten Donald Trump, and he'll do it again. I think there are a number of fantastic public servants, governors, senators, mayors, House members who could beat Donald Trump. But Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did it, and they have racked up significant achievements in the 2.5, 3 years that they've been in office. You see NATO expanding. I'm in Norfolk today, which is one of the three NATO headquarters in the world. We see NATO expanding with Sweden and Finland joining, demonstrating the importance of democratic alliances. And obviously, there's a clear choice between a president who knows how to link arms with allies and one who has threatened to leave NATO and let it collapse, one who's cozied up to Vladimir Putin and suggested that authoritarians like him and Viktor Orban are fine with Donald Trump. And so, no, I think Joe Biden has demonstrated that he'll beat Donald Trump, and he's going to beat him again.
Obviously, age is a concern for a lot of voters here. Paul Begala on our show yesterday noted one of the things, President Biden, it's not an issue of pivoting to the left or the center. He can't pivot to being 45 years old again. So at the State of the Union address, which is Thursday night, what do you think the president needs to prove to the American people?
I think that the State of the Union is a great opportunity to show a president that is in command of the very complex issues facing our country domestically and the very complicated and tough issues around the world. Remember, the president did that last year. He was given a State of the Union, and he started to talk about Social Security and the Republicans' efforts to undermine programs like Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. And the Republicans interrupted his speech and, kind of booed at the suggestion that they would jeopardize these programs. And then he freelanced and said, oh, great, so you're with these programs, and let's join together in saving them. I think you might see some moments like that Thursday night where the president will get peppered a little bit from some of the Republicans in the audience, and he'll respond in a sharp, humorous, and together way that'll show the American people that he's in command of the situation.
Finally, Senator, if you'll allow me, there's been all these new studies out about people with long COVID and how people are still struggling with some of the symptoms and after effects of when they had it more than a year ago, 2 years ago. I know you've been dealing with long COVID. I'm just wondering how you're feeling and what it's like every day for you.
John, thank you for asking me. I got COVID 4 years ago in March of 2020, almost exactly 4 years ago. And I had a mild case, and it was over pretty quickly, but I had one symptom that flicked on like a light switch and has never flicked off, which is every nerve ending feels like it's dipped in an Alka-Seltzer. And this is all over my body 24/7. It's never gone away. It hasn't gotten worse. I can work, I can exercise, I can focus, but it's annoying. And particularly when I want to go to sleep at the end of the day, as you imagine, you're trying to clear your mind and get some rest. This nerve tingling phenomenon is bizarre. But thank God it's something I can manage. An awful lot of people who have long COVID have much more serious symptoms, and I'm trying to use my role on the Health Committee in the Senate to, do research and focus on the development of treatments.
Well, every time I speak to you, I like to ask you about that, and you're still dealing with that. That is something. Thank you for being willing to talk about it. Thank you for talking to us this morning, Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. Kate, Sarah?
All right, John, good luck today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John. And just like the senator said, good luck out there, John. All right, he was once served as a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He's now accused of sharing classified information on a foreign dating website. We'll have details on this new case.
An Air Force employee now charged with sharing classified secrets on a foreign dating site. The man, also a retired Army lieutenant colonel, is accused of passing along information about the war in Ukraine to someone claiming to be a woman in Ukraine. CNN's Katie Bo-Lillis has the details on this. Katie Bo, I had to read just the headline to this a few times to really grasp what really is going on here. Please tell us.
Yeah, Kate. So according to the Justice Department, this man, David Franklin Slater, a 63-year-old civilian employee of the military command in Nebraska that is actually in charge of America's nuclear arsenal, was in the early days of 2022 engaged in an online relationship on a foreign dating website with a person who was claiming to be a woman inside Ukraine. Now, as this was going on, this is sort of the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Slater was receiving classified briefings about the Russian invasion. At the same time, this online relationship of his, this person claiming to be a Ukrainian woman, was trying to kind of wheedle information out of him, not just about what the United States knew about Russia's plans for the invasion of Ukraine, but also what NATO and U.S. plans were to try to counter the invasion. And she's sort of flattering him as she's doing this. She's calling him my secret love, my secret agent, my secret informant love. And she's sort of pushing him to try to provide her information, classified information that he was learning from his briefings and from his access to classified materials at work. Now, these are, which he was, according to the Justice Department, which he was actually doing. He was actually passing this information to her, the Justice Department alleges in these charges. So these are some pretty serious allegations. He now faces up to 3 decades in prison, as well as potential fines of $750,000. And it comes at a moment where the U.S. government increasingly aware of and concerned about the number of classified people with access to classified information, also on different social media accounts.
Yeah, I mean, just a completely different case, just big developments with Jack Teixeira just yesterday, and now this coming out. It's great to see you, Katie Bo. Thank you so much for the reporting. Sarah.
All right. Right now, officials are warning gangs control most of Haiti's capital. The U.S. Embassy remains open this morning, but with limited operations despite surging gang violence and mass prison breaks. Protesters have been in the streets demanding the ouster of the country's Prime Minister Ariel Henry. His whereabouts are currently unclear. CNN's David Culver traveled to Port-au-Prince to see how gangs have put a stranglehold on the entire capital city.
So we're like a block away? Yeah. It's as close as we can get driving. So we layer up and walk.
Oh, yeah. You can already smell it. Wow, look at people just still making their commute as tires are burning right in the middle of the street here.
No police barricade, no firefighters, most seemingly unfazed. These flames have been burning for several hours. Haiti has been engulfed in turmoil for years.
We don't have a home to live in, we don't have food to eat. That's what they're shouting.
Many here now fear their country is on the brink of exploding.
Does it feel safe right now?
No.
Does it?
No, doesn't say. My country is broken right now.
These folks blame the current government and Prime Minister Ariel Henry, appointed following the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021. They want Henry to go, but he says he's not yet ready to step down. This as panicked street shootouts like this one have become a near daily occurrence. It's often a clash between police and the gangs, which have essentially taken Haiti hostage. They flaunt their weapons and wealth on TikTok, threatening police and basking in lawlessness. Many residents now living behind barricades.
This is not the gangs doing this. This is the folks that live in these neighborhoods who are putting these up to prevent gangs from coming in and kidnapping.
Using whatever might stop or slow the kidnappers. Efforts to protect families and preserve innocence. That innocence shattered for others. This 14-year-old says he was recruited by a gang at 11. Tells me he's often forced to burn the bodies of those killed by other gang members. I want to change my way of life, he says, with a heavy look of shame. At an early morning food distribution, we meet dozens of women who have felt the wrath of gang violence. At times, we notice a lost stare in their eyes.
All of them have been victims. So there's nobody here who has not been a victim.
This woman's sister, shot and killed. This one's husband, burned alive inside their home. This woman tells us she was raped. She shows us the marks left behind. In recent months, gangs have seized more and more control over this country, including the roads leading to Port-au-Prince. Officials estimate that gangs now control as much as 80% of the capital. Even the U.S. Embassy and International Airport are mostly surrounded by rival gang territories. It's led the Haitian National Police to create an undercover unit. We go with them to the front lines.
This unit actually goes into gang areas, looks for gang members, and fights them.
The officers ask us not to reveal our exact location. And they tell us to work quickly, given we're standing exposed on a windy hillside.
As police have described it to me, basically everything behind me is occupied by the gangs. It's under their control. There are homes all around us. We're standing on the foundation of one home that have been abandoned.
They offer to drive us closer.
And you can see they're getting ready.
Yes, our driver's all geared up now, ready for potential gunfire to come our way. Stay away from the windows as we come in here. They describe this as the last defensive point, and beyond here is what they consider to be their front lines.
From here, you can see the battlefield. No signs of any suspected gang members, for now. Police are not the only ones trying to gain the upper hand here. In a fractured state, alternatives to the gangs and government surface. We're headed to meet a commander of BSAP, Haiti's armed environmental protection agency that has splintered from the Henry government, challenging its legitimacy. We pull up to a gated compound. The man in the purple shirt leads us in. He then changes into his BSAP uniform. It's the commander. He's in hiding from police. His message echoes the anti-government protester.
Toute révolution.
He flexes BSAP's strength in numbers and its potential to help bring stability. But when it comes to his own family...
You mentioned you have 4 kids. What do you think their future is in this country?
He fears their future is best served leaving Haiti. The desperation is felt beyond Port-au-Prince. In places like Jeremy, the UN chopper is the safest way to get there. It's about an hour ride. Members of the World Food Program take us through this rural coastal community, devastated by recent protests.
Right back there, you had 5 people were killed last week.
Right there?
It was right there, yeah.
We arrive at this agricultural consortium. The WFP buys food from these local farmers to then hand out. But the recent protests have blocked distribution efforts, leaving some food to spoil. It's frustrating for the WFP officials, as they know you don't have to look far to find hunger here. These farmers pointing to their stomachs, lifting their shirts to us.
You're hungry?
A lot of folks will look at Haiti and they'll say, it's had issues for so long. The question that no doubt people in the U.S. will ask is, well, why should we help?
Well, there are two reasons why you need to help. First of all, it's on humanitarian grounds. But then there's also our own self-interest in the U.S. So the longer you wait to act on Haiti, the more migrants there will be on our southern border. It's that simple.
Many here search for normalcy where they can. Even with the threat of violence, missing Mass for some is not an option. They wear their Sunday best and unite in prayer. Places of worship are not immune from gang terror, but they at least offer a moment of tranquility and hope. For now, David Culver, CNN, Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
I'm John Berman in Castle Rock, Colorado, where more than 1 million people have voted already in this state, largely dropping off their ballots at drop boxes just like that. This is the beginning of Super Tuesday.
And back here in the studio, even though the economy has taken off, many Americans say they're struggling with economic issues. Even the Cookie Monster is complaining. The White House is responding as shrinkflation hits so many household goods.
The world's biggest pollution monitor. How's that for a title? It just launched into the sky and has the power to call out some of the world's worst offenders. I'm Kate Baldwin with John Berman and Sarah Seidner. This is CNN News Central.
It is Super Tuesday, but how will the history books remember this one? Will it be the one that all but clinched the 2024 ticket this early? The one that revealed new cracks in a re-election pitch? Or the one where Nikki Haley surprised us all? We will soon learn, friends, as more polls across more states are now open. Voters can now vote in the states you see behind me there in green, and very soon these West Coast states in blue will be joining the party. More than a third of GOP delegates are at stake today. Right now, Donald Trump has 276, meaning tonight he could get very close to nabbing the nomination. As for President Biden, today he could add more than 1,400 delegates to help him reach his nearly 2,000 goal. John Berman is out in the cold in Castle Rock, Colorado. You're all bundled up with that nice scarf. John, I just noticed, breaking news, more people have come to that ballot box.
We are at 8 cars. 8 cars have now visited this ballot box here in Castle Rock. This is Douglas County, Colorado. This is a county that leans Republicans the last several elections, even as Colorado has voted Democratic. And as we've been saying, nearly 1 million people have already cast ballots in Colorado, largely at places just like this. There are more than 400 drop boxes scattered around the state. People drive up. We've seen them do it. They get right to this slot right here, and they take their ballot, and this is what the ballot looks like here. They take out their filled ballot, and they put it in that slot. Now, you can see in this ballot, Donald Trump's name is on it. Of course, there was that big Supreme Court ruling yesterday which determined that states do not have the right to remove him from the ballot for being an insurrectionist. His name was on the ballot anyway because the previous decision had been stayed, so people have been voting here for some time, nearly 1 million, as I said. Now, there is also in-person voting today that will kick off in about an hour, actually 2 hours from now, where you will see people walking into polling locations, casting ballots in person, but really just a few. More than 75%, 85%, depending on the election, will cast their ballot either by mail, where people would have had to have sent them in more than a week ago, or at these drop boxes, which are extremely popular. That's a freight train driving past us right now. Again, we've seen 8 people drive up to this drop box, which may not seem like a lot, but it's only 6 a.m. here in Mountain Time in Colorado, so people are participating on this Super Tuesday. Now, one of the states, or in this case a Commonwealth, that we will be watching on this day is Virginia. Virginia is one of 2 states, along with Vermont, that doesn't have party registration, so they're open primaries. Could be a state where Nikki Haley fares better. That is what we'll be watching for. Let's go to the ground. Let's go to Virginia now. Elena Treen is in Richmond. Elena.
Well, good morning and happy Super Tuesday. John, yes, you're exactly right. This is one of few states here today that is an open primary. That means Democrats, Republicans, independents, all alike can vote in this, and they can choose whichever candidate they want, regardless of their party registration. Now, I actually just chatted with two voters on their way out of this polling location behind me. Their names were Lynn and Steve, and they're both registered Republicans and said they voted for Nikki Haley today. I asked why, and they said because they do not like Donald Trump. And another question I asked them was, if Donald Trump were to go on to win the Republican nomination, as all signs are currently pointing to, who would you vote for in November if it was a matchup between Donald Trump and Joe Biden? And they had a very difficult time answering that question. One of them said, Steve said that he would consider a third-party candidate, and Lynn said she really wasn't sure what she should do. So that's just one sampling of how some people in this state are feeling. And look, I can tell you from my conversations with the Trump campaign, they do see Virginia as very crucial to their potential general election strategy. It's a battleground in their eyes, they tell me, and it's actually one of two states they visited over the weekend in the lead up to Super Tuesday. Really, the only two states they visited were Virginia and North Carolina, and that's because they really are going to try and make a play for it here. Now, John, I also just want to give you a little insight into how the Trump campaign is viewing this day with Super Tuesday. They are very confident of their chances here today and in this state, but across the country, and about his overall performance. And what they really want to see at the end of the night when Donald Trump gets up on a stage at Mar-a-Lago is he wants to be able to claim victory, but also he's really hoping that Nikki Haley drops out. They know that she is pledged to stay in through Super Tuesday, but it's unclear what she will do next, and that's really what they're hoping for him to be able to really solidify himself as not only the front runner, but the presumptive Republican nominee. John?
Very interesting to watch the different states that do it different ways. In Virginia, an open primary. Here in Colorado, there are Republicans, Democrats, and unaffiliated voters. Unaffiliated voters actually make up the largest chunk. They can vote in one of the two primaries here, so those so-called independents can have a big impact, but it varies from state to state. And Nikki Haley looking at these D states in different ways. Elena Trine, thank you so much for that. Kate, let's go back to you.
Let's talk more about this Super Tuesday. Joining us now are CNN political commentators Margaret Hoover and Maria Cardona. It's good to see you guys.
Thanks.
So Elena Trine was talking a little bit about the Donald Trump campaign. They're thinking going in today, very optimistic, all the things. Nikki Haley was on CNN yesterday, and she says that she's going to stay in the race as long as we're competitive. And she has not defined, she's not defining and still not defining what competitive looks like, what their measure is given any given state. After today, what do you think competitive looks like?
I mean, competitive for Nikki Haley in order to stay in the race will mean she has to be able to persuade donors to continue to fund an effort that can get her over the delegate count to actually have a clear path towards a nomination. That's what's going to persuade them. And by the way, donors, in my view, have been enormously generous to continue to demonstrate that it is worth having an alternative to Trump in this race. I mean, she has raised extraordinary amount of money even after losing her home state of South Carolina. So there's an importance, I think, for Republicans who want to stand for something else to demonstrate the weakness in Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
There is this alternative to the previous, to essentially an incumbent nominee. And yet, if there's not a path to the delegate count, to actually winning it, it's going to be hard to see how donors continue to put millions of dollars into the coffers of an effort that won't be able to simply hit the math.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. With an eye towards the possibility, maybe the likelihood, whatever you want to say, of a general election rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I'm wondering what is more concerning to you, Maria, on this day. Is it the possibility that Donald Trump can win over Nikki Haley's 20, 30, 40% that she's been able to hold on to, i.e. his weakness that we've seen? Or the Democratic voters are just not showing up for Joe Biden because we know there's the enthusiasm hasn't been there we've seen in polls?
Well, I think at this point, the campaign should be concerned about everything because that's the only way that you win, right?
Paranoia is a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. And while I think there's a lot of flaws in the current polls, let's say that that's where we are, because that's going to mean that the campaign is going to leave nothing on the table. They're going to take nothing for granted, and they're going to put every single investment and effort into making sure that not just the Democratic coalition shows up for Joe Biden in November, but all of these voters that have shown Donald Trump has a huge weakness with the Nikki Haley voters, with the independents, with the never Trumpers, with suburban women. And all of that, I think, is going to be the focus of the Biden campaign. And I do think that today you are going to have more of a focus as to what the general election is going to look like. And I think that is going to help the Biden campaign. Right now, you have all of the focus on the GOP because they're the ones that are having this crazy primary, right? Yeah. And normally, when you have an incumbent, a lot of the energy is with the opposition. Those are the two forces that we're seeing right now in all of these polls. The Democratic coalition hasn't come home yet. They're not necessarily paying attention. And I also tell you another dynamic that we're seeing in these polls. A lot of times what you're seeing in these polls is people, even Democrats, they're showing their frustration. For them, it's very different to say to an anonymous poll, an anonymous pollster, yes, I'm very frustrated with Joe Biden. He hasn't done what
7
I
in
want.
10 don't want to see this rematch.
Exactly.
Right?
But when it becomes consequential in terms of the choice that
when
really
it is
matters,
the rematch.
when it is the rematch, we have seen that Democrats are actually overperforming.
Margaret, if Super Tuesday renders Nikki Haley something akin to just a protest candidate going forward, does sticking to it further, if donors remain there, does it impact her future running as a Republican down the road? Do you think
the future
good
of the
or
party,
bad?
I mean, I think the future of the party is up for grabs, and it's up to leadership, people like Nikki Haley, to stand for something different than what Donald Trump is offering. And so I don't think we should be so cynical as to think, will this hurt her for taking a stand? We should applaud her for taking a stand.
I was actually leaving on that possibility, like maybe it's laying the groundwork for I'm going to stand for something different.
Or maybe there has been a permanent realignment amongst the right in this country, at least, you know, and that's a question up for grabs. I will say her staying in this long has had an enormous impact on down ballot races. There are 115 House races that are going to be contested today, and many of those are Republican on Republican primaries where Trump has endorsed somebody to challenge an establishment, quote unquote, establishment Republican, who, by the way, establishment Republicans in this case still endorse Donald Trump. But you really do have Republicans who are reasonable, who want to work together with Democrats and other Republicans to actually pass a border security bill, send funding to Ukraine. And they're being targeted by Trump-endorsed candidates to just make the party more pure. So I think the effect of having somebody like Nikki Haley still on the ticket today helps the party down ballot as well.
So much. It's going to be a lot of lessons learned today. The outcome of how many delegates and where they go where may not be as much up for grabs, but still it's always exciting because polls don't matter today. The only polls that do are actually...
There you go.
Thank you. The voter. Over to you, Sarah.
All right. Thank you, Kate. The list of who wants to be the next leader of Senate Republicans is growing, and former President Trump will likely play a big role in who will succeed Mitch McConnell. This morning, Donald Trump's legal team is accusing Manhattan prosecutors of misconduct after the former Trump Organization CFO pleaded guilty to perjury. Also, new video of what Ukraine says is one of its drones striking a Russian ship. It is incredible video. We'll break that all down coming up.
A picture worth oh so many words. We're going to show you one, and I will ask you, what does this one tell you? I'll leave you to ponder that while we also have this new reporting that Republican Senator Rick Scott, right there on the left, of Florida, is weighing a bid to succeed Mitch McConnell as the next top Republican in the Senate. That position comes with huge amounts of power. Now, Senator Scott, he would be joining Senators John Thune and John Cornyn, who've already thrown their hats in the ring for the leadership position. Let's get over to CNN's Lauren Fox in Washington. She's got much more on this. And Senator Scott, he went after this powerful position once before. What is this leadership fight going to look like this time, Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take months, really, to get underway, Kate, but it's already taking shape. You had yesterday Senator John Thune announcing he was getting in this race. You had that tweet last night from Rick Scott. Obviously, one of the big questions here is what role will former President Donald Trump take in this leadership election in the United States Senate? You have a lot of Republican members who argue this is something that perhaps Donald Trump should stay out of. This is about members picking their own leadership, and no matter who gets the job, they're going to have to work if Donald Trump is elected again with President Trump, or if Biden's elected with President Biden. But it's really unclear exactly how much influence Trump will have in this race, in part because, Kate, this is a secret ballot. Senators go behind closed doors in a secret meeting. They cast their votes, and no one really knows who they're supporting. So while Donald Trump might have a favorite candidate, while Donald Trump might make it clear on Truth Social or on X who he is backing, the reality is no one knows who senators are actually casting their ballot for. So Rick Scott clearly trying to send a signal, if he were to get in this race, that Donald Trump and he have a close working relationship. Senator Thune's relationship with Trump is a bit rockier, or has been in the past, although Thune has now endorsed Donald Trump for president. And then you have Senator John Cornyn, who, when he made his announcement, made it clear in his statement that he'd work with Trump over a series of issues in the past. And I think everyone is trying to make it clear that they have Trump bona fides in some way or another. But ultimately, this is going to be a Senate Republican conference vote, a Senate Republican conference decision. And Rick Scott tried once before to challenge Mitch McConnell. He wasn't successful. Kate.
Sorry. The secret ballot element of this, I think, is going to be a critical bit. It's good to see you, Lauren. Thank you so much. Sarah.
All right, newly released text messages show in stunning detail how one of Donald Trump's lawyers and allies was still trying to overturn the 2020 election after the January 6th Capitol attack. Also, we'll take a look at the growing desperation in Ukraine as troops there running out of ammunition as they try to battle back Russia. One soldier is saying it's a matter of life and death now. Following the new revelations from former Trump Organization CFO Allen Weisselberg, Trump's campaign is going on the attack, once again targeting Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. In a statement, Trump's campaign claims Bragg has committed repeated prosecutorial misconduct in his illegal, desperate pursuit of Trump. The statement goes on to say the DA has turned a blind eye to the admitted and repeated perjury of Michael Cohen. Joining us now, former federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, Jessica Roth. You hear that, you see that statement from Donald Trump, but Allen Weisselberg admitted to perjury, correct? Give us some sense of what's happening here.
Yeah, so it was a surprise that Allen Weisselberg showed up in court and pled guilty to perjury. I think it was yesterday. There's a lot happening. Right. The purpose of the letter that was filed by Mr. Trump's lawyers, as I read it, was really to erode public trust in the integrity of the DA's prosecution of Trump by pointing to the lies and unreliability of Michael Cohen as a witness. There were accusations of prosecutorial misconduct and selective prosecution in prosecuting Allen Weisselberg for perjury, whereas Trump says that Michael Cohen also has engaged in additional perjury. Why isn't the DA prosecuting Michael Cohen? That's an odd argument to be hearing from someone who's a third party, essentially. Right. That's the kind of argument you would expect Allen Weisselberg's lawyers to make. They didn't make that. And it also comes in a letter to Bragg as opposed to a motion before a judge. So this is a letter, if it's in fact asking DA Bragg to reconsider some of his choices, that could have been filed privately with the district attorney. Right. Instead, it was released to the public. So I read it really as a public relations move, an attempt to undermine the public's faith in the integrity of the prosecution against Trump.
A political stage, a political move as well, and we've seen that in other cases, especially here in New York. Trump's legal team has asked the New York judge presiding over his hush money case to block a limited gag order that was proposed by state prosecutors. Trump's attorneys are saying that because he's a leading candidate in the election, speaking of politics, he shouldn't be barred from sort of facing this gag order. Where do you see this going? Because the courts are about the law, not about the politics. That is how they're supposed to be.
Yes, and I expect that what we're going to see is the trial court imposing a limited gag order as requested by the district attorney, similar to the one that was ultimately affirmed by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and imposed by the trial court in the D.C. case. It is a limited order. It doesn't prevent Mr. Trump from talking in general about the case, but rather from talking in a way that would tend to cause threats to individuals, court personnel, members of the prosecution team, notably not the DA himself, who's still fair game, but things that would tend to undermine the integrity integrity of the proceedings because they would threaten witnesses or jurors.
Yeah, the threats to jurors, witnesses, anybody who's involved in the case is a huge no-no in any court case. I do want to ask you about this new information we're getting in about the right-wing attorney who was a big Trump supporter, Kenneth Chesebro. He helped devise the fake electors plan. And we're now seeing some of the text messages that are going back and forth where you see that they're still trying to overturn the 2020 election even after the January 6th attack. What do you make of all of this? I mean, this is sort of giving you a bird's eye view of all the things that were going on. And one of those text messages, according to, all of the text going back and forth, one person says, hey, I'm going to let the White House know about this. And then we, lo and behold, see this fake elector plan happening in person on video.
Yeah. So this new evidence is really astounding, and it supports the theory set forth in both the January 6th indictment brought by Jack Smith, the special counsel, and also by Fani Willis in the Georgia RICO case, which really put forth in those indictments that this was a scheme to overturn the election through, in part, the use of fake electors. Ken Chesebro had been saying to prosecutors, investigators who he said he was cooperating with, that he was really just an attorney providing legal theories, and that the theory about using alternate slates of electors was, in his view, just there in case some of the litigation challenging the election results in certain states went Trump's way. This new information really puts the lie to that argument and shows that there was a plan to use these alternate electors, even if there was no litigation pending challenging the election results, in an effort to overturn the legitimate results of the election.
It's really stark seeing the evidence in front of you. Talking about it is one thing, seeing the evidence a whole different story. Jessica Roth, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Kate?
Today is a huge day for voters. 16 states, 1 territory holding contests, a game-changing number of delegates at stake for Republicans for sure. What we could know by the end of this wild night. And the Cookie Monster getting some backup from the White House today. We will explain.
All right, welcome back. I'm John Berman. I am at the Douglas County Fairgrounds in Castle Rock, Colorado. And this is an in-person polling location here in Colorado. You can see Vote Here, Voter Service Polling Center. At the top of the hour, if you are a resident in this county, you can show up and vote here in person. There won't be that many people doing it because most people in this state vote by mail or put their ballots in a drop box. That's where we've been all morning, but now we've moved here just in case we see actual people walking in to cast their ballots in a little bit. Colorado is one of the Super Tuesday states, 15 of them voting today. American Samoa votes as well. This is a huge day in the nominating process. But moments ago, we heard from Donald Trump, who very well may be the Republican nominee, the semi-official Republican nominee shortly. He's saying he's not even focused on the primaries anymore. He's fully looking at President Biden now. With me now is CNN political commentator and from Spectrum News, Errol Louis. Mr. Louis, always great to see you. Donald Trump says he's focused exclusively on President Biden. What does that mean, do you think?
Well, what it means is that he wants this primary process to be over. What he doesn't want to hear about is the 40% of Republican voters who pretty consistently across all of these different caucuses and primaries are voting for Nikki Haley. And Nikki Haley says that 40% can't just be ignored. She's talking a lot like somebody who wants to maybe even bring that 40% into the convention and make some demands, whether it's for personnel, maybe for resources, maybe for a change in policy. But Donald Trump, it would be premature to assume that because he's going to win the nomination, that he's got the full backing of the party. And that's something to keep in mind as we watch the results tonight, John.
One of the issues is the 40% for Nikki Haley is 40% of voters. It's not 40% of delegates. And when you're talking about going to the convention, you're going with delegates. You're not going with voters, Errol. So I do wonder for Nikki Haley how much longer she feels like she wants to continue this.
Well, that's right. In fact, Nikki Haley apparently has not scheduled any campaign events for after tonight. that alone will tell you that the end could be near for her. She might just kind of throw in her cards, and that could be the end of it. On the other hand, we should keep in mind when candidates leave a campaign, they normally say that they have suspended it, not that they have ended it. And what that could, in fact, mean is that she's going to sort of hold on to that political lottery ticket, if you want to call it that, on the off chance that something should happen to Donald Trump legally or otherwise that would make it impossible for him to continue. She would be the last person standing. So I think she's going to at least maybe preserve that level of viability. But also, again, you know, you never know. She may have a reason to go forward and say, look, I represent a movement, a tendency, an objection, if nothing else, to Donald Trump. And that voice needs to be heard.
So, Errol, I covered the George W. Bush campaign in 2000, and he basically wrapped up the Republican nomination by the end of March. And then it seemed like an eternity, several eternities until the convention. And during those intervening months, not a lot happened in the presidential campaign. I wonder if this time it's going to feel different, if these candidates, if it is President Biden and Donald Trump, what they will do to fill that void. Let's talk about President Biden, because it all starts with him Thursday night at the State of the Union. What does he need to do there? And then how does he continue to fill that void until the conventions?
Well, look, President Biden and the Democrats know that they have to call the base home. They've got to make sure that they can make a case and that the base voters are in place. You do that first, and then you start reaching across the aisle. You start reaching out for independents. So I would expect in the State of the Union speech to hear a rip-roaring call to what Democrats always talk about, which is preserving Social Security, making sure the economy works for the working class and the middle class, making sure that a woman's right to choose is preserved and safeguarded. And that right there will hit a lot of their base constituencies. And then they've got to hit them again and again and again and get it organized and get those union households in place. I think they've got a lot of work ahead of them. Fortunately, they've got a lot of time. So from the Democratic point of view, it's going to be, I think, a base strategy of the kind that we've seen for the last 4 or 5 cycles, John.
You used the phrase rip-roaring, and that's interesting to me because I was reading Axios on the way here, and Axios notes that there are Democrats who are excited to see President Biden in a more fighting mood, it seems, from that Evan Ostos profile in the New Yorker and other places. Do you think that is what Democrats want to see? They want to see a defiant President Biden who is directly taking on Donald Trump, throwing around terms like loser, which is what he's been doing?
Well, no question about it. I mean, the particulars of fighting with Donald Trump, that's a different kind of category. But what I'm expecting to see is what we saw when Bill Clinton ran for re-election in 1996 and when Obama ran with Joe Biden, by the way, for re-election in 2012, which is to say, we are going to focus on the economy first and foremost. We're going to make the case that we are the best stewards of the economy compared with the other party, and that we are going to fight for the middle class and for the working man and woman. We're going to fight for working families, as Bill Clinton used to say, till the last dog dies. And that's a way of letting people know that that's what the priority is, even if things aren't perfect. You know, so you don't want to paint a rosy picture that's at odds with people's reality, but you say, like, look, inflation is coming down. Unemployment is coming down. Jobs are expanding. We're going into new areas of technology that are going to create major prosperity for working families, and we're going to try and make the tax system and every other part of the economy shore up that progress. You've got to make the case. I mean, those who don't make the case end up going home losers. And you know, again, it doesn't get every last family. But it is the basic Democratic message, and I think that's what people are expecting to hear from the president.
Errol Louis, great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us. And Sarah, when you next see me, I may be inside for the first time today, which I will say without complaining will be a welcome change, since it's not 30 degrees here yet.
You know what I'm hoping is that you have a rip-roaring good time there in Castle Rock, Colorado. Maybe they'll let you in. Maybe they won't, John. All right. Thank you for teeing up our next story. Happening today, President Biden is set to announce a new strike force tasked with cracking down on what they call corporate rip-offs in everything from groceries to prescription drugs. This coming ahead of the president's State of the Union address on Thursday night. CNN's Vanessa Yurkevich is joining us now. This announcement is coming amid a really big conversation about so-called shrinkflation and the shrinkflation effect. It's fun to say, and apparently Cookie Monster is jumping into this? What's going on?
He's leading the charge. Bottom line is, do not mess with Cookie Monster's cookies. But a lot of Americans agree. He's talking about something called shrinkflation. And this is what we see when corporations shrink the product size to avoid raising prices further. Research has indicated that consumers are actually more okay with smaller products than higher prices. But essentially, if you look at cookie prices over the past 2 years or so, for about a pound of cookies, you see that the price started at about $3.70 for a pound. It's all the way up to $5.02 a pound. And in the last year, according to a study by Senator Bob Casey, in just the last year, we've seen cookie products shrink by 6%. And so you have everyone now jumping on this conversation with Cookie Monster, who said, me hate shrinkflation, me cookies are getting smaller. You have President Biden, who actually, the White House retweeting about this, chiming in, saying C is for consumers getting ripped off. You have everyone from Sherrod Brown from Ohio saying that his constituents are absolutely sick of shrinkflation. And you have Elizabeth Warren and you have Bob Casey saying that they actually have a bill for this. They want the FTC to crack down on corporations that are shrinking their products while keeping prices the same, if not higher. Surprising fact that paper goods has actually seen the biggest shrinkflation in the last few years. And you also have the worry about something called greedflation. This is essentially when corporations may see prices softening on some of their products, but still keep the product smaller. And that is what we do not want to see. We want to see corporations keeping up with changing prices. That's probably a tweet best left for Oscar the Grouch instead of Cookie Monster.
When he was going to weigh in.
He might weigh in soon, but you clearly have, even though he's a Sesame Street character, Cookie Monster really tapping into something that many Americans are seeing and feeling right now.
The politicians are responding. Cookie Monster has the floor. Thank you so much, Vanessa Yurkevich. Appreciate you. Kate.
CNN on the front lines with Ukrainian soldiers who are now rationing ammunition as they are running low. Asked what happens if the U.S. doesn't send more aid, one soldier tells CNN, I think we are all going to die. We will be no more. We've got more on this. And there's a new eye in the sky to track pollution around the world. The satellite that's looking to call out some of the world's worst offenders. New this morning, Ukraine says that it sank a Russian patrol ship in the Black Sea overnight. The new images coming in show an unmanned drone approaching a ship just before a large explosion. Now, this attack comes as Ukrainian forces are running low on everything from tanks to ammunition, they say, and now essentially begging U.S. lawmakers to send over help in the form of the multi-billion-dollar aid package that now seems almost permanently stalled. Now, CNN's Nick Payton Walsh, he saw the strain on Ukraine's soldiers firsthand when he got this exclusive look at the front lines.
It's a lonely path ahead. The Russians have never been louder or closer. Occupied Bakhmut is just up the road. But now, some Ukrainian tank guns are silent just when they're needed most. Here, they don't have enough shells.
Sometimes they just won't fire at all for a whole day. Other days they'll be shooting constantly. And I tell you, it is loud on the other side of that hill, and it's sort of surreal to hear that sort of noise over there and see this tank unit having a ration their ammo.
Без зброї люди є, але беззброєно ми самі це не ті війни, що коли з мечем чи шаблею ми могли щось зробити.
We learned they didn't fire at all that day, or the day before, or the next day. The silence here is what losing sounds like. So too is what these soldiers had to say.
Если американцев не решат, вам давать деньги, что будет?
Я думаю, що ми всі загинемо просто. Ті, хто тут зараз є, нас не буде.
Is this the worst you've seen it?
Yeah, definitely. I think this year is going to be the worst year in the war.
Well, I do know that there's certain units that they're running out of tanks.
How angry does it make you?
Yeah, I'm pissed. I'm absolutely pissed off. There's no point in trying to paint this in any sort of light where it's good for us that Russia takes Ukraine. That's going to be very, very, very bad for us geopolitically.
And joining me now for more on this is Ambassador Mark Green. He's the president and CEO of the Wilson Center, former Republican congressman from Wisconsin, and the former head of USAID. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. What is your reaction to hearing that? Nick Payton Walsh is reporting what he's hearing from soldiers on the front lines, that they're now rationing ammunition.
Well, you really do get the sense that we're at a crossroads moment. So the Ukrainians are remarkably courageous, remarkably resilient and innovative, but they need the tools to succeed. There's no question about their character or their willingness to confront Russian forces, but they have to have the tools to do it, to push back.
You know, Nick Payton Walsh, he says today that he says there's a sense on the ground that that things are shifting in Russia's favor in Ukraine. The sense that he's getting. 2 years in, Vladimir Putin sure appears emboldened. You'd said during your recent visit in Ukraine, I was watching, that your money is on the Ukrainians. Where does your confidence come from on that?
Well, again, I think it's the resilience of the Ukrainians. We traveled, my recent trip, 1,300 miles all around the country, including to areas that Russians once occupied. And the Russians move, or the Ukrainians move immediately whenever there's an attack to repair and rebuild. And they found ways to keep children's lives as normal as possible. So their character is not in doubt. What I think's missing back here is understanding the nature of this conflict. I think we too often characterize this as a bilateral, almost family squabble across the border between Ukraine and Russia, and it's far from that. Everybody's watching. Ukrainians are watching to see whether or not the U.S. will stand with them. The region's watching. I was in Moldova. They're worried about the disinformation tools they're seeing coming this way, and Putin's efforts to target civilian infrastructure and to displace people, to cause burdens and pain and costs in the region. So I think this is very much a moment where deterrence is in doubt. People are looking and trying to see whether or not the U.S. will continue to be the leader, the deterrent force that has really, given the modern world order that we all count on.
And Ambassador, that's what leads people's attention to go directly back to Capitol Hill and where that aid package is or isn't going. There's no concrete forward movement right now on passing Ukraine aid in Congress. Look, and you know Congress well. You were there for many years in the House. Do you think, from your perspective now, that ensuring Ukraine aid gets a vote on the House floor is worth Speaker Johnson putting his speakership at risk?
Well, and I'm not going to provide political counsel to anyone, but what I will say is, from the perspective of America's presence around the world and what people have come to count on and our leadership in the world, this is that key moment. And so actually voting on and passing the aid, which I think eventually they will do, is crucial for sending the right signal around the world. Again, we're seeing from Vladimir Putin that dictators are on the march. It's not just what he's doing, it's the company he keeps. Remember where he's getting his weapons from: Iran, North Korea. He's getting his economic support from China. He's getting support from Venezuela and Nicaragua. Hardly the characteristics of a bilateral small squabble. This is essential for American leadership in the world, and this is essential for pushing back on dictatorship, which seems emboldened by our inaction.
Ambassador Mark Green, thanks so much for your time. Sarah?
All right, it's being called the Eye in the Sky, a brand new satellite that could give unprecedented data on one of the most critical greenhouse gases that is at play in global warming, methane. Our Bill Weir explaining how this is going to hold fossil fuel companies accountable.
3, 2, 1, ignition. And liftoff, Falcon 9.
Paid for by the likes of billionaire Jeff Bezos and other donors, the nonprofit Environmental Defense Fund just launched a new kind of eye in the sky.
Vehicles just downrange.
Methane Sat. is designed to circle the Earth every 95 minutes or so, and with cutting-edge detail, spot plumes and leaks of planet-cooking pollution long associated with the production of natural gas. If carbon dioxide is a blanket of average thickness overheating the Earth for centuries, methane is like a blanket 7 feet thick, with over 80 times the heat-trapping power of CO2 for about 2 decades after its release. Sometimes it leaks from old equipment or orphan wells, and sometimes when there's no one to buy it, companies just burn it in a practice known as flaring.
What we found here in the Permian Basin is that operators are wasting enough gas to heat about 2 million homes a year.
In 2021, EDF took us up over the oil and gas fields of Texas to sniff out methane leakers with a specially equipped airplane.
So this is carbon dioxide down here? Yeah. And this is methane.
But now they can fly over every oil and gas basin in the world, where 80% of global supplies are fracked and
we can basically create a movie of what's going on with respect to methane emissions. Before, we could just take snapshots when we had a plane in the air and we can get permission to fly. This is a whole new game. It really creates an enormous leap forward in our ability to really understand greenhouse gas emissions.
While other satellites can spot methane, what they find is often kept private. But EDF says that in about 18 months, their data will be open and free on Google Earth Engine for anyone to see.
You just have a real clarity now, a clarity we've never had before. And I think people realize you don't have to accept what somebody says, whether that's a government or a company. You can actually directly look at it, see what it is, and that is completely different than anything we've ever had for greenhouse gases. What I refer to is we're going to have radical transparency.
And what has been the response from big oil and gas companies that you're doing this?
Well, I think many of the companies see this as a real opportunity because they really do believe, and I suspect they're right, that they're doing a good job, but many of them aren't. It gives countries and companies the tools to select who they buy gas from and where that gas comes from. So the first time they'll have the ability to make really informed decisions, and those informed decisions will have an enormous positive impact on the climate.
Radical transparency. How is this going to play? I mean, that was a really interesting way to put it.
Exactly. I've also often wondered if we could see planet-cooking pollution, how would humanity behave, right?
Yeah.
And this is a great experiment on that. As the fracked natural gas boom happened around the world, especially in the United States, it was sold as like a cleaner alternative to fuel, but that's only true if it never, ever leaks. And it leaks a lot. And methane makes up about 1/3 of global warming. So stopping that, especially in the near term, is key to straightening out things.
Yeah, seeing is believing, at least we hope.
We
right?
hope. We hope.
Bill Weir, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast, and that means more than a dozen states now have their polls open on this Super Tuesday, and more states will soon be joining. What voters are saying and what everyone is watching for.
Just how far some of Donald Trump's key allies went to illegally overturn the 2020 election and keep Donald Trump in office after the January 6th Capitol attack. We have the newly released text messages that reveal more about that fake electors plot.
And it's a party on the International Space Station. A big celebration this morning as a new crew arrived. Where was our invite? I'm Kate Baldwin with Sarah Seidner and John Berman. This is CNN News Central. Right now, nearly every spot on the Super Tuesday map is open and ready for business. And by business, I mean voting. California opens next hour as America collectively clears a gigantic 2024 hurdle today in the presidential race. Today, 865 delegates are up for grabs in the Republican side. And right now, Donald Trump has 276, meaning tonight he could get really close, though he cannot secure definitely the nomination, which requires 1,215 delegates. And Trump, moments ago, he spoke out on the Super Tuesday, projecting confidence about what the end of the evening is going to mean for him.
Is there a peace deal between you and Nikki Haley to move forward as a party?
Well, my focus
focus is really, at this point, it's on Biden. We should win almost every state today, and we think we're going to be very well unified.
Nikki Haley on that unified front. Nikki Haley definitely will have something to say about that today, but we will see, and the voters have the say. John Berman is in Castle Rock, Colorado, inside, no less. John?
The scarf is off. We are now inside an in-person polling location in Douglas County, Colorado, and there are voters who have now shown up. It's just after 7 a.m. local time here, mountain time here. That is when the polls, the official in-person polling places open. People have arrived here, and they are beginning the voting process here. These are late voters by Colorado standards because nearly 1 million people have already cast their ballots either by mail or by the drop boxes where we were all morning long. More than 75% of the people here actually use those drop boxes, just leave their ballots there, and by 7 o'clock tonight local time, that's 9 o'clock Eastern, they will all be collected and counted very quickly, because one of the things that happens here in Colorado is they count as the ballots come in. So the minute that the voting stops, they have a pretty good sense of where the results are. So we should have a good sense tonight where the voting stands here in Colorado. Unaffiliated voters, by the way, make up the largest voting bloc here. They can vote in either presidential primary, but only one of those presidential primaries. Colorado, one of the 15 states that will be voting, and we should know those results by tonight. American Samoa as well. California, the biggest pot of delegates available, and that is where Stephanie Elam is in Santa Ana, California, a state that a lot of people are watching for tonight. Stephanie.
That's very much the case here, John, and that's the thing. A lot of people just want to write off California as just being so strictly blue that it doesn't matter. But you've got to remember that there are some down ballot voting that has to happen today, mainly for that open senator position. And so that is what a lot of people are looking at here today. The polls are not open yet. We're here at this polling place. Polls open at 7 a.m., at 6 a.m. right now, so we still have an hour to go before the polls open. But what people are looking at are the 3 U.S. representatives that are going after Senator Dianne Feinstein's open seat. That would be Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, and Barbara Lee. And of course, there's also Steve Garvey, the Republican, who is running for the seat that most people only know because he was a baseball great playing for the Los Angeles Dodgers and the San Diego Padres. So that is what set up this battle here. And we see a lot of people have been putting their money behind Adam Schiff. He's raised the most money by far. He enjoys the support of most of the California Democratic Party here as well. Keep in mind, California is Democratic 2-1 over Republican. So he has spent a lot of money going after Garvey, trying to raise his profile. And the reason why he's doing that is because California takes the top 2 winners of today's contest, and they automatically go to November. Does not matter which party they come from. So he's figuring if he can knock out the 2 other Democrats and just go head-to-head against the Republican, those would better his odds here in the state. Also worth noting, too, that here in California, people have to vote for 2 questions when it comes to the senator. One to fill the end of Feinstein's term, and then one for another full term, 6-year term beginning in January 2025. John.
So a lot at stake, well beyond just the presidential contest that people are watching so closely. Stephanie Elam in Santa Ana, California, waiting for the polls to open there for 2 more hours. Here in Castle Rock, they are open now, and people are starting to arrive here to begin to cast their ballots in person. Sarah.
It's pretty quiet there so far, but we've got a full house here, John, right in the studio. Joining me now, CNN senior political commentator and former special assistant to President George W. Bush, Scott Jennings, president of the Manhattan Institute, Reihan Salam, and CNN political commentator and former Obama administration official, Van Jones. All right, gentlemen, full house. Love seeing you all here in person. Good to be here. Nice. You're welcome for the standing. It's good for your legs. It is Super Tuesday. Surprise! Pollsters have pretty much foregone saying, okay, this is going to be Trump and Biden at the end of this. They're going to go head to head. They're going to come out on top. But there are lessons that can be learned beyond who wins. What warning signs? I'll start with you, Scott. Will you be looking for when it comes namely to Nikki Haley and whether she pulls some big numbers here?
Well, obviously, if you see a persistent number of Republicans in these primaries that are voting for her and then telling exit pollsters I'm not going to vote for Trump, or I would be dissatisfied if he were the nominee. You have to keep an eye on that. Now, some of the national polling we saw over the weekend indicates a lot of the people who say that already voted for Biden in 2020 anyway. But still, if you're Donald Trump and you're looking at where you're going to win the election, you don't want to be leaking any of your own party. I think his group is actually pretty solid right now. But this race may be won or lost on the margin, so a few thousand people in a few swing states who just can't quite do it would be won. For Biden, it's honestly just the uncommitted. Do you see people in blue areas going in and casting an uncommitted protest vote because they're upset with him for one reason or the other?
I want to ask you, Van, do you think that some of those voters who say, I want Nikki Haley, if she does not make it, can Biden pull those to his side?
He'll get some. He'll get some. He'll have to. He's leaking support and parts of his coalition that he needs. Some of the younger voters that are still upset about what's happening in Gaza. Some of the working class men of color now beginning to follow some of the white working class guys out of the party. So he's got to make that up someplace. Probably makes it up with women on abortion, probably makes it up with some suburban voters who just can't pull it for Trump. But you're seeing some real readjustments here and who they can count on going forward.
I want to ask you, Rehan, the Vice President Harris came out and for the first time said there has to be an immediate ceasefire. She did it publicly. We have not heard the same words from Joe Biden. You have this issue of the uncommitted vote. What do you think happens there?
My ultimate view is that when you look at those voters who are undermotivated for Joe Biden, they're not Gaza voters. They're mostly moderate voters who are very skeptical about the president and his record. And so my view is that if he's going to pull this out, if he's going to win in November, it's going to be on the strength of appealing to those moderate voters who might otherwise be too unenthusiastic about his record. And I think that that's one very good reason, in addition to the larger strategic reason, for him to be circumspect about pivoting too far in that hard left direction on Gaza.
It'll be interesting to sort of watch this. There were 100,000 votes cast in Michigan uncommitted. And I think that really got the administration's attention. Scott, Americans have spoken. We've looked at these polls. You've seen them over and over again, that immigration is a huge issue now, one of the top issues beyond the economy, for example. Who's going to get blamed for this? Of course, the president who is in place always gets the most heat. But the Republicans in the House tanked a bill that was bipartisan that the Senate came up with. So who gets blamed at the ballot box? Or does anyone? Do people just stay in their lanes?
Well, I think political blame has already been assigned, and it's pretty obvious in the polling that Joe Biden is suffering on this issue mightily. First of all, immigration is the #1 issue in the country, which you pointed out, and it is the worst issue in the Gallup poll for Joe Biden. He has a net negative job approval on this issue of 39 points. I think the gambit to try to blame this on Republicans has obviously failed, because I think Americans say, well, you've been president for 3 years. You reversed all of Trump's policies. This has gotten worse and worse and worse on your watch. And all of a sudden we come around to an election year and you want to change your tune. I just don't think people are buying it, and it's showing up in the polling.
Van, what should the Biden administration do about this issue of immigration? Because it's not just being seen on the border. One of the things that Republicans made sure of is busing people, no matter how bad humanitarily that is dropping people off in places like New York, in Martha's Vineyard, so that it's in the faces of people who don't normally see it.
Well, look, Republicans had a strategy when it came to immigration. Scream fire, then spread the fire to blue states, and then stop the fire trucks when it was time for Congress to act. And so it's going to take time for people to understand that they're getting scammed on this. But everybody has a breaking point when it comes to immigration. How many people can come here without papers? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 1 billion? Well, now everybody, including Democrats and Republicans, have hit the breaking point number. But Democrats willing to act, Republicans won't. That's going to be, and you say we can't win that argument. Well, we just won it in the New York congressional race a couple weeks ago. So Democrats can win on immigration. It's uphill for us.
Well, Democrats are winning on the issue.
I was going to say, jump on in.
They're winning on the issue by actually pivoting against the Biden administration position. Senator John Fetterman has come out and said, I can get behind the House Republicans' H.R. 2 measure on immigration. That is not something the Biden administration has said, number one. Number two, when you're looking at those busing operations, basically the governor of Texas, state officials in Arizona and elsewhere have asked migrants, where would you like to go where do you see more opportunity for you, family networks and other resources? New York City, Chicago, other cities initially declared, we are open for business, come on in, we're going to provide you with the assistance that you need. In New York City, there is a right to shelter. That has been something that's come under intense strain. When you look at Tom Suozzi in the suburbs of Long Island, he's been saying, hey guys, I've been very critical of the hard left on immigration for a long time, and he actually has a case to make. He ran as a primary candidate against Governor Kathy Hochul, saying, I'm going to be tougher on this issue than other Democrats. So Fetterman and Suozzi have a case to make. It's a heck of a lot tougher for President Biden to make that same case. That's tricky.
We'll see him make it. Your favorite word is hard left. Anything's hard left. So listen, it's not a hard left position to say that we've gone too far in terms of what's happening in Gaza. That's a mainstream American position, and I think that Biden, you will see, will adopt a mainstream American position to support Israel, but to also want more humanitarian support for what's going on in Gaza. That's not hard left. And it's also, when it comes to immigration, you are correct that the existing position is no longer popular in either party, and you're going to see Biden take the mainstream position there as well.
Van, I'm sorry to say that actually a large majority of Americans believe that Israel has a right to defend itself.
Of course, and so do I.
And also, they believe that Hamas should actually surrender, and that's how we're going to move forward.
And the majority of Americans also are concerned about the humanitarian crisis. I'm just saying
that is created by Hamas, indeed. And let's hope the Biden administration sticks with the posture of recognizing that Hamas represents the greatest threat.
You have the Biden administration doing two things. You've heard this from Kamala Harris. On the one hand, she said Hamas must be eliminated.
Absolutely.
Israel has the right to defend itself. On the other hand, she says because of the humanitarian crisis we are seeing with thousands of people killed, we cannot continue to do it.
Which is the mainstream American position.
But the trouble with the word ceasefire is that for a lot of people in the Democratic Party, ceasefire means Israel ceases firing.
As opposed to
Hamas does not.
As opposed to a bilateral ceasefire. And I think it's important that it's a bilateral ceasefire, which I agree with that.
Yeah, but the language here matters, and I think it's a buzzword, but they don't want Israel to be able to defend itself.
That's not true.
That's not what they say.
That's
and certainly the policy is still there.
What do you think the activists who were chasing around AOC around New York City last night?
But here's the thing, those are the activists.
What do you think their view is?
Here's what I'll say. Those three people, I have no idea what their view is, and some of those people need some serious therapy. But I think what you're going to see from Joe Biden is someone who cares about Israel, who stood for Israel, who wants the best for Israel, and who also cares about the Palestinians, which is most people. And I think that for people to try to box him in and say, if he says anything or makes any pivot toward the humanitarian Palestinians, now he's moving to the hard left, that's political games.
This is not the voting issue. This is not the voting issue on Super Tuesday. It's not the big issue driving Democrats.
It's the big issue driving for young people.
It is a big issue. It is not as big as what's happening on the border. It is not as big as the economy, but it's definitely an issue. Rayhan Salam, thank you so much. Van Jones, always good to have a proper argument at the table. I like it. Scott Jennings as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Just a reminder, Super Tuesday, 16 races, one consequential day. Special coverage begins tonight at 6 p.m. right here on CNN and, of course, streaming on CNN Max. New text messages shedding new light on the scope of the fake electors plot after the 2020 election. We will bring those to you. There's also some video of it that they released. And Secretary of State Tony Blinken is hosting two very important meetings this morning that could prove consequential in Israel's war against Hamas. And cracking down on price hikes, President Biden today launching what the White House is calling a strike force targeting corporate ripoffs. We'll be back.
This happened just moments ago. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke ahead of his meeting with the Qatari prime ministers as negotiations to get a ceasefire in Gaza is ongoing. Listen.
Assistance getting into Palestinians who so desperately need it, and can also set the conditions for an enduring resolution. And it is on Hamas to make decisions about whether it is prepared to engage in that ceasefire. But throughout, including the original ceasefire that we were able to achieve last year that brought hostages home and created a week's quiet, humanitarian assistance doubling during that time, Qatar played, along with Egypt, the critical role in getting us to that point, and it continues to do so now, and I'm grateful for that on behalf of the United States. It's also urgent, irrespective of ceasefire, to dramatically increase the humanitarian assistance that's getting to people inside of Gaza. The situation for children, for women, for men who are caught in this crossfire Hamas is making inside of Gaza is unacceptable and unsustainable. Israel has to maximize every possible means, every possible method of getting assistance to people who need it. The United States will continue to strongly support those efforts, along with many other countries around the world. But it requires more crossings, it requires more aid getting in, and once that aid is in, it requires making sure it can get to the people who need it. So we will continue to press that every single day because the situation as it stands is simply unacceptable. We have a lot to talk about, but again, I just want to emphasize that for the United States, Qatar has been an exceptional partner. We're grateful for that partnership and for the vital work that we're doing together every single day, my friend.
Well, thank you.
Oh, you heard Anthony Blinken there talking about the situation in Gaza being unacceptable. Chief National Security Correspondent Alex Marquardt is joining me now. What sort of things, what else do you sort of hear from him? We heard the word ceasefire a lot as they're trying to push that through.
Yeah, Secretary Blinken, Sarah, standing there with Prime Minister Thani from Qatar. This is an annual meeting between the Qataris and the U.S. in which they discuss a whole range of issues. But of course, there is no bigger topic of conversation between these countries than the ongoing war in Gaza. The U.S. and Qatar have been at the very center of the conversations about how to get to a ceasefire. And there, in those comments by Blinken, you could hear the two main things that they are going to be discussing today when it comes to Gaza: the ceasefire, the efforts to get those discussions across the finish line, and then independent of that, even if a ceasefire doesn't work, the dire need to get more aid into Gaza. The U.S. has been stepping up its arguments and its criticism, frankly, of Israel, that not enough aid is being allowed to get in, not enough aid is getting to where it needs to be. We saw that horrible incident last week, Sarah, in which more than 100 Palestinians were killed as they mobbed that aid convoy. And that is just evidence of the fact that there isn't enough aid in Gaza, and it's not getting to where it needs to be. So that's what those two men are really going to be discussing today, among several other issues. There is a ticking clock of Ramadan, the Muslim holy month, that is set to start next week. U.S. officials and others have said that a ceasefire needs to be in place by then. And the goals of a ceasefire, of course, would be to get those Israeli hostages released who have been held for the past 5 months, to get Palestinian prisoners released from Israeli prisons, to get a break in the fighting for those 2+ million Gazans who so desperately need it, and for that aid to get into the Gaza Strip. They have been making progress, but clearly the mediators, and foremost among them, the Qataris and the Americans, are still struggling to get that deal across the finish line, Sarah.
Right. It's not just the bombings, it is the starvation that is making this such a desperate situation. I do want to ask you about ceasefire talks because they've been happening in the past few days in Cairo. Do we have an idea of where those stand at this point?
Well, what's interesting about these, Sarah, is that all the parties except Israel showed up this time. So Hamas, which has been going to Cairo, they were there, the U.S., the Qataris, and of course the Egyptians. The Israelis said, we're not going because Hamas has not yet given us a list of the hostages who they have, who are alive, and who is dead. Now, the U.S. has said that Israel has essentially agreed to the framework of a deal. So what we've seen in the past few days are these conversations that Egyptian state TV said today are still facing difficulties. So they're still trying to get that ceasefire done. It is not yet a done deal, Sarah.
Alex Marquardt with the latest reporting on what is going on with ceasefire talks. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Kate?
Coming up for us, new text messages shedding new light on the scope of the fake electors plot after the 2020 election. And a new crew arrives at the International Space Station. The joyful team meeting and welcome. And what the plan is now that they're all up there. We'll be back.
All right, we are getting new emails that reveal just what people were doing surrounding Trump, trying to make sure that he remains president even after the January 6th Capitol attack. Let's go ahead and go to our Marshall Cohen, who has some of the details of this newly released information that sort of goes down the gambit of what exactly happened with that fake elector scheme. What are the details you're hearing?
Hey, Sarah, there was a lawsuit in Wisconsin. The real electors from 2020 sued the fake electors, and as part of the settlement to that lawsuit, a whole bunch of new materials became public yesterday. I want to break down 3 big revelations for you about Ken Chesebro, who was the architect of the fake electors plot. First of all, in December 2020, he wrote a memo spelling out step by step how to pull this off, how to organize slates of Republican electors in states that Biden actually won. We knew that he made that memo, but we didn't know this. Look at this text message that he sent to Donald Trump's top attorney in Wisconsin, Jim Troupis. He said to Jim, can you send my December 6th memo to Trump lawyer Justin Clark? Messaging on January 6th being the real date is key, focusing on January 6th. Then Jim Troupis, the Trump attorney, responded, I have sent it to the White House this afternoon. They are the real decision makers. We didn't know that they had sent these materials to the White House. Very notable there, although to be totally transparent, they did not say who exactly at the White House got these materials. But it's important, Sarah, because just a few weeks later, the Trump campaign carried that plan out. In 7 states across the country, the fake electors voted, and they hoped that on January 6th, Mike Pence would recognize the Republican electors and throw out Joe Biden's real electors. January 6th, who was in the crowd outside of the Capitol? None other than Ken Chesebro himself. We've known this before, but we've never seen these pictures, selfies that he took that day. There's one of him outside of the Washington Monument, which you're seeing there, and this one here with Chesebro in the red hat. That's Alex Jones behind him, the far-right conspiracy theorist. So he was outside the Capitol that day, breached restricted grounds. He even texted someone saying that he smelt a whiff of the tear gas that day. But even after all that, Sarah, he kept pushing to overturn the election. Here's a text message from 2 days after the insurrection, January 8th, 2021, where he texted that Trump lawyer, Jim Troupis, saying that the events of the last 2 days open up legal options in the states for winning rulings favorable to Trump. He thought that somehow they could capitalize on what happened to still push to their efforts to overturn the election, even after January 6th. Sarah?
Marshall Cohen, thank you for those details. Kate?
Let's talk about this. Joining us here is former Manhattan prosecutor Jeremy Saland. Marshall Cohen lays it out really well. But broadly, before we jump into one of these text messages that you find most interesting, what do you think of this added all together? I mean, it was like 1,400 pages of text messages released.
You know, what we've heard before is a speaking indictment when some of these, when Jack Smith had this indictment, laying out this narrative, and you could follow. These texts are sort of a speaking indictment of all of the backstory and how we got to where we are, and it really demonstrates that Chesebro is not some guy on the periphery. He is really embedded in this, and it starts to bring in other people. It doesn't directly have a comment with Donald Trump or a message with Donald Trump saying, I know this and I should do X and Y, but it's pretty damning.
You point to, and I'll read the message, you point to one of these messages from that Chesebro sent to Troupis that Marshall Cohen introduced us to in November of 2020. At a minimum, with such a cloud of confusion, no votes from Wisconsin and perhaps also Michigan and Pennsylvania should be counted, perhaps enough to throw the election to the House. Why does this one stand out to you?
Because, you know, he uses the term, the cloud of confusion. It's more like a fog of deceit. He has this real intention of saying, we're going to sort of throw a wrench in, not sort of, we in fact are going to try to throw a wrench into the system. We in fact are going to try to make this confusion so we can seize control and overturn that election. Not because it's based on the merits, because it's based on what we want to do.
It's really interesting. Can I lean again on your Manhattan
Yes,
prosecutor,
exactly.
bona fides? Happening in New York City, Donald Trump's lawyers, they sent a letter to the Manhattan DA accusing the office of prosecutorial misconduct because they pursued perjury charges against the former CFO of Trump Org, Alan Weisselberg. We talked about this on the show yesterday. But then not going after Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, for, they say, the same conduct, perjury. Here's what they write. The DA, the district attorney's conscious choice to ignore obvious and admitted criminal conduct by Cohen and to instead deploy unethical strong-arm tactics against an innocent man in his late 70s underscores the irresponsibility of your conduct in office. What's going on here?
It's very poetic. I think that it's a great job to try to lay out some storyline that may not exist. I can appreciate it. I'm a defense attorney, and I'm saying you're going after my client for what appears to be similar conduct of some guy who might arguably be worse, and you're using him as your actual witness at trial. There's going to be issues with Cohen at trial, but it doesn't mean because Cohen may have done something wrong. And by the way, Engoron said he was still credible. By the way, if Cohen had done something wrong in the federal case and he's perjured himself and he has an issue with supervised release, that's a federal matter. It's not D.A. Bragg's issue. So D.A. Bragg definitely is going to have issues with Cohen when he gets up there and testifies because he has done things and he has committed crimes. But don't conflate because one guy may have done something bad, another guy could not have done something equal or worse. So I think it holds some water, but it's absolutely an exaggeration of what really is happening. Let's not let it take its own path.
And kind of this adds to the big lead up to what is going to be this first criminal trial for Donald Trump that's going to kick off in we're at 2 weeks at this point. As we're looking at the calendar. It's good to see you, Jeremy.
You as well.
Thank you so much. So happy Super Tuesday, everyone, for all who celebrate. It's the biggest day of the 2024 election calendar so far. Voters in 16 states, one territory, having their say today. And if you were thinking about heading to Miami Beach for spring break, you may need to think again. The city says that it's breaking up with spring breakers.
All right, this just in. Taylor Swift is urging people to vote on this Super Tuesday. As everyone knows, Taylor Swift was born in West Reading, Pennsylvania in 1989, but she was raised in Tennessee, which is a Super Tuesday state, and is voting today. And Taylor Swift's tweet, which she sent out to her tens of billions of followers, suggests that people do go out and vote on this Super Tuesday. Very much part, if not the biggest part, of the primary season. The major candidates, though, beginning to look forward to the general election. Just a short time ago, Donald Trump did an interview where he said he's not focused on Nikki Haley at all anymore. He's focused exclusively on Joe Biden. And you get the sense that President Biden, too, is focused very much on Donald Trump. That is what you get if you read this stunning new profile of President Biden that just came out in the New Yorker, written by our friend Evan Osnos, called The Last Campaign. And joining us now is Evan Osnos. Evan, great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us. A very revealing profile. And what's interesting in that, Axios this morning says that President Biden is engaged in this new trigger Donald Trump strategy. You picked up on something like that as well. Explain.
Yeah, it really struck me, John. In the course of our interview, he described Donald Trump over and over, 4 times, as a loser. He said losers who are losers are never graceful. I mean, it was a very specific word choice. I think we know Donald Trump has had this agonizing relationship to the reality of having lost the 2020 election, and that gets into his head in a way that very few issues do, and Joe Biden is going straight at that issue. I thought Axios had it right today when they called it a trigger Trump strategy. Go for the jugular, because that will resonate with him.
And you say you can't get into Joe Biden's thinking and state of mind without getting to the issue of Donald Trump. So what space does Donald Trump occupy in Joe Biden's thinking right now?
You know, I think that for a long time, John, there was a piece of Joe Biden that felt like Donald Trump as a person, as a political fact, was so offensive to Biden's notion of American politics that it was almost impossible for him to process. He thought, this is a guy who I'm going to contend with in 2020, but then normalcy will be restored. That was kind of at the core of his thinking about this country. He's come to terms with the fact that actually Trump represents a phase in American life, and it is completely entwined with Joe Biden's life in a way he never could have imagined. After all, he's been in politics 51 years, been in Washington, and it never occurred to him that his legacy, his biggest bet on himself, would be entwined with this man. And I think for that reason, John, it's very personal for him to show that, in fact, his vision of the country is the right vision, the dominant vision, and that Trump's is an aberration. It's a strange detour from who we are as people. He said this line in a speech that I attended not long ago, where he said, the question is not who is Donald Trump. We know who he is. He said, the question is, who are we? And I think that's going to be the theme that you will hear many, many times between now and November.
How does that shape his thinking in terms of how he views the Republican Party? Because that seems to have changed as well.
Yeah, that's a big change. I was really, this caught my attention. 4 years ago, when I interviewed Biden during the 2020 campaign at his home, he said, look, I really do think there will be a kind of epiphany among Republicans. If Donald Trump is driven out of the White House, Republicans will come to their senses. He didn't use that expression, but what he meant was that they will meet with me and make deals. And he said to me this time, and this is a big idea, he said, the Republican Party is gone. He said, it's no longer just that Donald Trump has taken over the party. The Republican Party is gone. That is a big strategic decision about whether or not you think you can work with them to make deals in a second term. I didn't hear much from him, the Joe Biden of 4 years ago, thinking, you know, I'll find my spots. He had his moments in the first term when he could do that. He has no illusions that that is possible now with a speaker like Mike Johnson that can't even bring his own caucus around on a border deal that Republicans themselves were authors of.
The State of the Union address obviously is Thursday night, a huge moment for President Biden, where a lot of people think he needs to accomplish quite a bit as they really kick off this next stage of the campaign. Who behind the scenes, and you spent a lot of time not just with the president but with people behind the scenes, Evan, who can tell President Biden the blunt truth? Who does he listen to, if anybody?
You know, he has a core group of advisors, a few of whom have said to him over the years at very decisive moments things that moved history in important ways. Take somebody like Mike Donilon, a really influential and important figure in the White House. In many ways, he's his message meister, the one who figures out how do we take Bidenism as a concept and put it into language. Mike Donilon had been a huge supporter of Joe Biden running for president in 2016, really believed it was a good idea back when it was the end of the vice presidency. At the end, though, after the death of his son, Beau, it was Mike who said, look, I can see it on your face. This is not a good idea. And of course, Joe Biden did not run that year. There are some people around him who he really listens to. And right now, in this moment, before the State of the Union, one of the things that they are deciding is how much can we hit the Republicans on issues like the economy. And that is an area where they see tremendous opportunity. And I think you're going to hear a lot about that on Thursday night.
Evan Ossow, it's always great to speak with you. I have to tell you, everyone in the office the last 24 hours just poring over every word in this profile because, as I said, it was so revealing. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. And Sarah, from Colorado, where people are voting here in person and in the drop boxes, which we showed you all morning, I'm going to throw it back to you. Sarah?
Thank you, John. In zero gravity, where you don't visitors often, this is the kind of welcome you get, apparently. A happy entanglement on the International Space Station, even as their astronauts' countries are enemies on the ground. Plus, it's a part of television history, and it's just been sold on eBay. So how much does one pay for the famous booth from The Sopranos' final episode? We'll have it coming up. On our radar, this is crazy video. Investigators in Nashville looking into a tragic plane crash that killed 5 people. The small aircraft had alerted John C. Toon Airport's control tower to an engine and power malfunction, urgently requesting clearance for an emergency landing. The airport granted permission for a runway landing, but the pilot sent this one final message.
My engine turned off. I'm at 1,600. I'm going to be landing, I don't know where.
Charlie Foxtrot Bravo Whiskey Hotel. I'm declaring an emergency. Do you have the airport in sight? Straight in runway 2. Straight in runway 2 at John Toon. Do you have the airport?
Yes, I have the runway in sight.
November 5 Alpha Tango, runway 2. Runway 2, clear to land.
I'm too far away. I won't make it.
Oof, that's hard to listen to. Eyewitnesses say the plane simply exploded on impact. Fire crews managed to put out the fire. The National Transportation Safety Board will investigate the crash. This is just in. At least one person has died now in Michigan after that massive industrial fire outside of Detroit. While the investigation is still preliminary, officials suspect that the 19-year-old was hit by debris from the explosions that carried out a mile. The facility housed more than 100,000 vape pens. And while officials now say air quality is no longer a big concern, additional explosions on the site are possible. They're asking people to stay away. The legendary booth from The Sopranos finale just snagged more than $82,000 on eBay. Both seats, the table, and even the sign that says reserved for the Soprano family were included. They should be for $82,000. But the infamous jukebox, though, was not part of the package. The iconic booth was put up for auction by owners of Holstein's Ice Cream in Bloomfield, New Jersey. They're currently renovating the ice cream shop. Kate, that's a good way to kind of pay for some of those renovations, don't you think?
It sure is. I still have trouble with that last episode of The Sopranos, still to this day.
Yeah.
Okay, friends, we now have exclusive new video of how John and Sarah welcome me to the studio every morning.
That's right.
This Love Fest is
Accurate.
actually a party at the International Space Station. Almost as unbelievable as what I just said. As new crew members arrive to the ISS. This now means, with this joyous party, that there will be 11 people up on the International Space Station for a bit. CNN's Kristen Fisher has much more on this. I just want to be this loved when I arrive at work.
Kate, you would be this excited too if you were up at the International Space Station and you never got to see any new humans. I mean, a new crew arrival up there is a big deal. And I should also note that 3 of the 4 members of this new crew that arrived very early this morning, called Crew 8, they were rookies, so, they'd never really flown in space before. They were quite literally getting their sea legs as they were wrapping them around some of the other members that were already on board the space station. But look, they're excited to see each other. They work hard to get there. And, this crew, Crew 8, they launched from the Kennedy Space Center on a Falcon 9 rocket about a little over 24 hours ago now. And they've actually earned the nickname. The official name is Crew 8. Their nickname is Crew Late because, the first launch scrubbed due to weather. So they made it to the International Space Station in one piece. They're going to spend about 6 months up there conducting scientific experiments, whatnot. And Kate, I'll leave you with this. There's also a Russian cosmonaut on board that crew, and he'll be joining 3 other Russian cosmonauts up there as well. So just a reminder that the space station continues to function despite all the conflict happening here on Earth in regards to Ukraine.
It's amazing.
You guys are still giggling about the hug. I shouldn't have ended with that. I should have ended with the hug.
You can. We can learn so much from space on so many levels.
It's so beautiful. Okay, it's been such a...
If I didn't have a back issue. No, I was going to jump and leap and koala you, except that I realized I'm still recovering. But that comes later.
This is how we are normally. That was just totally normal, everyday activity.
This is why John went to Colorado. He knew this was coming, and he ran away. He now understands.
He wanted none of this.
All the time. Never does.
But thank you for joining us. This is CNN News Central Newsroom with Jim Acosta. Up next.
I was like, I'm going to...